101 ESPN, he's Alex Ferrario, that is Tanner Hendrickson, and I'm Brandon Kiley. There's nothing really that is obvious to start with today. No Blues game last night, no Blues news today. Cardinals rained out.
So we're talking politics today.
What? That's how we're doing?
Yeah.
What?
Yeah.
All right,
all kinds of stuff going on in the world.
We'll step out of the show for this one then.
There was a station down in Dallas that I was really rooting for. They called it The Freak. One of the guys that I really like, his name's Jeff Kavanaugh. Totally random aside. He worked
Shout out, Jeff. Hope you're listening.
Yeah, he worked on the
buddy.
morning show. Fortunately, the station shut down the other day.
Oh.
It was one of those, like, you talk whatever you want to during the course of the day. So there'd be, like, politics at some points, sports at some points, just random nonsense at other points. Apparently that doesn't work, so, yeah.
What are you talking
Unfortunately,
about?
it failed.
Let's try random nonsense today. So
Back
there
to
was this
sports.
guy yesterday.
So,
Junk drawer for 3 hours.
instead, let's talk about the St. Louis Cardinals. Because, Alex, when you look back at the offseason, one of the decisions that they had to make was, what do we do with our rotation? Big decision, right? Huge choice. Should we look at some of the internal options that we had last season? That would have included Jack Flaherty, who they will see on the mound today going for the Detroit Tigers. Could have included Jordan Hicks, who has now been outstanding so far this year after changing up his arsenal and throwing a splitter like 20% of the time for the Giants. They decided, no, we're not going to go that path. We're going in a new direction. We want guys that we can count on, that we know what they're going to give us just about every time that they go out there on the mound. Now, you could argue that the results so far from Kyle Gibson, for example, have not been up to every expectation you would have liked. But it's been okay for the most part. I would say you have a pretty good idea of what you're getting out of Lynn, out of Gibson, and certainly out of Sonny Gray thus far this year. So, Alex, when I look across the diamond today and I see Jack Flaherty on the mound, I don't have anything in me that says, yeah, I wish he was in a Cardinals uniform. I don't miss it at all. And then I go back to what we heard from Michael Gersh when we talked with him at the Cardinals home opener this year. And I feel like anybody that is pining for Jordan Hicks, for example, listen to this, and even if you disagree with it, I think it will give you a better understanding of why the Cardinals went the way that they did with the pitchers that they did sign.
There are different teams in different... We need to win the regular season. Like, we need to focus on winning through the 162-game playoffs, right? There are some teams who can already be focused on what they're going to do in the playoffs, right? And be setting up... There are teams who have half their quote-unquote playoff rotation is currently on the IL. Yeah. But that's okay because they're set up in a way where they think that's the path that they can go down. That's just not where we are as an organization today, right? We're not positioned where we can have like 10 different guys each take 15 starts. Like, that's just not where we're set up and what we're capable of handling at the moment. And so we needed some certainty in guys who have shown that and like, it's not innings like I don't necessarily think people should be so focused on like pitching the 6th and 7th inning of a game or facing a team a third time through the order. Like, that's not, it's like taking the ball 30 times. Like, that's really hard to do. And taking the ball 30 times puts us in a position where we don't have to have guys who, I'm not going to name anybody, but there's guys last year who just weren't really big leaguers, right, who ended up being big leaguers because they happened to be at AAA when we traded away half our pitching staff and had still, 60 more games to get through,
Jack
right?
Flaherty.
And he's not talking about Jack Flaherty. He's talking about Drew Rom.
Oh, he's like our number 7
he's
this
hurt
year.
right now, man.
The Cardinals could not go out there aiming for upside. They had to aim for a floor. They had to say, we can't let the floor drop out on us this year. And the way to do that, for better or worse, and I think I argued all offseason for worse, is by going out and getting dudes that you can just trust to make 30 starts.
And then the floor dropped out on the offense, not the pitching.
Yeah, and that's why you are where you are right now. But we're seeing that's why they're still at least in contention in this division. They're right around 500 because the pitching has been really solid. Can you imagine, Alex, if they had signed Jordan Hicks, for example, in the offseason, and you learned early on in the year, yeah, just not a starting pitcher. Okay, now what? Like, who is your 6th starter right now? Is it Zach Thompson? Is it Andre Palante?
Shrug emoji.
Sim Robersay, who's started like 10 games at the AAA level dating back to last season.
No, but
been
we're gonna
really good so
scratch
far
and
this
claw.
year. That's why in the offseason, they felt it was necessary to go out there and sign guys that gave you a capable floor instead of reaching for the ceiling that you could get from a guy like Jordan Hicks or from dreaming still like the Tigers are on what the upside could be with Jack Flaherty.
Yeah, I have zero problems with Flaherty and Hicks and O'Neal, and all the guys that aren't here right now having success elsewhere. Because the way I look at it is you gave all of those guys plenty of opportunities to prove that they could be something, and they failed. Now, Jordan Hicks was never given the opportunity to be a starter for the Cardinals, but it didn't work in the reliever role, and you flirted with potentially bringing him back, and you decided not to, and he went on and someone else found that recipe elsewhere. So if that sticks in your crawl, fine, because those always happen. But first of all, I look at Jack Flaherty, and if the Cardinals would have re-signed him, 29 in the third innings with a 4.9 ERA, I think people would still be pretty upset about that with Jack Flaherty, hoping for the ace. But I looked at all of those guys that they made the decisions this offseason and said, good, you gave them their chance. They did not have success. It's time to move on. And if they go on to be MVPs or Cy Youngs elsewhere, well, then it was never going to happen here. And sometimes that's how it goes. Whether you want to blame the Cardinals' development, maybe you want to blame the manager, maybe you just want to blame the player. It was never going to happen in St. Louis, and that's how I looked at it with Flaherty and O'Neal. And Jordan Hicks right now is probably the one that probably stings, but you're right. You couldn't have gone into this offseason and said, hey, instead of going to the market, we just threw, what did he sign for? 75, 14 mil. We just threw $14 million to Jordan Hicks a year to be our third, fourth starter. People would have been in a riot over that.
Can you imagine?
People would have freaking lost their mind.
Our text line wouldn't work anymore.
Yeah, so I get why they didn't do it. But at some point, you got to start going for upside.
Yeah, I agree with that. And I think if you have a complaint about the offseason, it's not that, well, look, they didn't sign Jordan Hicks. No, because you're kidding yourself. You're right. They weren't in a position to do that because, to your point, BK, I can't even name their sixth starter now. So imagine if Jordan Hicks failed. Like, I have no idea what they would do. We might as well just wave the white flag at the end of April is what they should have done then in that case. And he couldn't bring back Jack. Let's just be honest. There were bad vibes from Jack last season, and they were needing change for change. Now, where I think it is fair to be critical is, to Alex's point, swinging for some upside at that number 2, like Jordan Montgomery was available. And you know who I feel confident is going to take the ball 30 starts, like Michael Gersh said? Jordan Montgomery is the number 2. So, like, that's where I think it is totally fair to be critical of the St. Louis Cardinals offseason approach. Having one of Lance Lynn and Kyle Gibson, we said it from the moment they signed the second one of them. It was, hey, whoa, what do you really need 2 of them for? Like, one of them is great. 2 of them is a little bit too much of going for building the floor and not focusing on raising the ceiling.
Okay, let's talk about this. Because 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get involved in the show. The
Somebody
YouTube
get you,
chat,
buddy.
youtube.com/101 ESPN STL. It took 13 minutes for us to get there.
Come on, guys. Just be cool. We're only on the air for 7, okay? Pump the brakes there.
Yeah, 11:06. Your time check brought to you by Clarkson Jewelry. Now we should spend the next 7 minutes complaining about the fact that we didn't get in on time.
Oh, that's
fine.
what other people
right.
do.
We'll figure it out. Somebody on the text line said, but guys, what does it say about our coaching staff that every single one of these guys goes elsewhere and ends up becoming a better player? That is the bleeping issue. I don't feel that way. Am I alone on this? Jack Flaherty's the same guy this year that he was last year. Now, he's made a couple of tweaks. You'll probably see it today. His strikeout stuff is way better than it was last year. It's back to closer to what it was when he was prime Jack Flaherty. He still doesn't have great command, but he's striking guys out more often. He's added some velo to his slider. He's landing it a little bit more often. That's a big thing for him, and we know that was his number 1 pitch. If he gets that slider back, he could be the version of himself that he wanted to be. Still doesn't have enough command, though, so he's got a 4.9 ERA for a reason. Jordan Hicks went on to become a better pitcher elsewhere. Guys, I'm going to give a little bit of credit to the Cardinals. They fixed him last season. We all wanted him DFA'd around this time last year. We came on the air, and I remember the show that we did where we said, I think it's time. I don't think that you can continue doing this. We talked about optioning him, and if he didn't want to be optioned, we think that they should just DFA him, just get rid of it. Stop going back to this. It clearly hasn't worked. They stuck with him. It did end up working to the point where he was one of their best players the second half of last season. Low bar to clear, I get that, but he was awesome. One of the better relievers in the sport. Tyler O'Neill, that's the guy we're going to point to. Everybody saw this coming. Everybody. And it's not because he went somewhere else. It's because he's super motivated right now. So who else are we pointing at? The guys that go on to have success elsewhere are mostly guys that lacked opportunity here. And you can criticize them for that. That's totally fair. The Arozarena thing, totally fair to be critical of them not giving him the opportunity, not seeing the talent that Tampa clearly did. Who are the players, though, that had a long runway here that failed and went on elsewhere to succeed? Who am I missing there? And I'm open to the idea that I'm just totally wrong on this, but I don't think I am. I know there's a tone issue there. But
there definitely was, and I'm glad that you picked up
I'm
on
not
it.
answering this because I don't want to get angry on a Tuesday.
Do you
I
feel
can't
like
think of
they're-
anybody.
No, I don't. Marcelo Zuna's the one that comes to mind, but he had success here. People
And
just
there was injuries.
Yeah, people just refuse to accept the
off-field.
fact. Well, a lot of off-field.
And at the time, like, you saw him climb a wall and a ball land in front of him,
Right.
and there was no DH. And guess what he's doing in Atlanta? He's DH.
But people refuse to accept the fact that there was success with Marcelo Zuna here. It's just what you gave up for him is the part that stings. I mean, he was the bat that you needed for those first couple of years. Frankly, was a huge piece for 2019 of getting through that Brave series. So that's the only one that comes to mind. But, I mean, Adolis Garcia, but that dude got cut by somebody else. And other than that, you're talking about
again,
a ton of
lack
dudes.
of opportunity. He didn't fail here. He just had a lack of opportunity here.
Lane Thomas, but Lane Thomas, I feel like Lane Thomas is getting success because you were on a team that had no expectations and they needed somebody to be a big bat for him.
I think Lane Thomas gets.
Yeah. Can we talk about Lane Thomas for a second?
I mean, I
he's
take Lane
hurt now,
Thomas
I know.
over Michael
But
Ciani.
Lane Thomas, everybody sees his numbers and goes, Lane Thomas. If you really dive into the numbers, and the Major League Baseball told you how they felt about Lane Thomas because he was available at last year's deadline, he's a platoon bat. That's what he is. He's like
Lane Thomas
Carlson
is
at
a
best.
worse hitting version of Harrison Bader. That's what he is.
With worse defense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He has an 860 or 876 OPS in his career against lefties, a 675 OPS against right-handed pitchers.
Yeah, no power.
He's a platoon
Last year
bat.
was the first year he hit more than 20 home runs.
And he did that because he was out there every day. Even last year, and this is the whole going back to the Lance Lynn thing, right? He threw a bunch of innings, so of course he gave up a bunch of
Home runs don't matter.
He ended up hitting 28 home runs. Good for him. Good season. No doubt about it. He also got on base 31% of the time. 31%. Lane Thomas is not a dude that I'm going to point to and be like, Cardinals missed there. No.
You used a tone and you asked for examples. I'm giving up examples.
I would rather have Lars Nootbaar, Jordan Walker, Brendan Donovan.
Well, you can't have Jordan Walker because the Cardinals broke him.
Fair. Who else am I missing here? I would probably rather have long-term Alec Burleson than Lane Thomas, if I'm being honest.
Tanner, your rebuttal?
I don't know if I have much of a rebuttal. I think they're like the same guy, but one's left-handed, one's right-handed. You know, like I think both are kind of splitty. I think Burley does better contact than Lars Nootbaar, but Nootbaar's probably got better, or not Nootbaar, Thomas, but Thomas has probably better power. Like, if you told me I had Burles on my team, I'd go, cool. If you told me I had Thomas on my team, I'd go, cool. Like, I don't think there's
Somebody
a
brings up Luke
significant
Voigt.
difference.
No.
No. You got Giovanni Gallegos. That was a win.
Won
that
that
trade.
trade.
It was a win.
Patrick Wisdom. No. Where's he playing for?
Is he still here? Or is he still with the Cubs? Or is he out of the league?
I think he's playing. I don't remember where it's for.
Okay, well, the fact that we can't
think he's
name where
hurt.
he is playing tells you exactly what you need to know.
He's pure power, strikes out a ton. You would hate watching Patrick Wisdom play every day, and also he's not starting for you. You would not start on this team.
You moved on from Colton Wong. Well, that Colton Wong experience worked out for you.
And Wong aged quickly, by the way. Like, he fell off a cliff
And on the
quickly.
pitching side of things, you've made a lot of good decisions on the pitching side of things that just, like Michael Wacha, people are going to go to. Cool, I'll give you that one. But you moved on from Carlos Martinez at the time. That fell flat fast. Yeah. Jack Flaherty, you're looking at, has not been good.
The guys that didn't get opportunity once again.
Dakota Hudson,
Sandy Alcantara,
John Gant,
and Zach Gallen. Those are the guys that you look at and you're like, man, would have been nice to see them here. Yeah, absolutely. But also you traded them for a guy that you needed at the time, and it was a lack of opportunity, not a lack of success at the big league level. For all the talk, and this is a talent identification issue, it's something we've talked about a million times. The Cardinals have to improve in this area. But for all the talk about them getting all these big leaguers and them going on to have success elsewhere, it's not really true. What they do is they have these guys that come through the system that stall out somewhere, and they decide they like somebody else better, and they trade that guy that goes on to have success before they reach the big leagues. And that has led them to having this hesitance to trade anybody now. Now they're like, well, let's just keep everybody, see them all get to the big league level, and hopefully somebody ends up working out.
I think the Cardinals are hoping that baseball goes to a softball rule to play 10 players on the field at once.
Oh, sweet.
Yeah.
My point is not to be some Cardinals honk here today, but they made the right move in a lot of these decisions on who to move on from at the big league level. They got to get better at the minor league level, man. Their pitching development has got to be better over the long haul as well. So there's a lot you can criticize the Cardinals for, and most of it is more than reasonable. Some of the stuff that I've seen them get criticized for, you don't have to make it up anymore, guys. They lost like 100 games last year, basically. It's like we don't have to reach for the criticisms that are fair for this Cardinals team. Speaking of something to be excited about, though, you've got one of those things right now in your shortstop. We'll tell you about what Nolan Arenado had to say about a young player that he actually likes next year on 101 ESPN.
Liberatore, the pitch. On the ground, slowly hit. Gotta hurry. One there. Wins arm. Saves the day. Liberatore gets the double play ball. And the cannon arm of Masyn Winn sends us to the 11th.
That's what it sounded like on Bally Sports Midwest. Masyn Winn has been spectacular so far this year for the St. Louis Cardinals. So much so that Nolan Arenado, who said, what was this, 3 months ago now?
He didn't mean it, man.
That the young players took over the clubhouse and they needed to add some more veterans to the mix. Well, Nolan Arenado's enjoying the Masyn Winn experience. He said the following to Ken Rosenthal of The Athletic, and this is posted over at The Athletic earlier today. To be honest, playing with Masyn Winn makes me want to step up my fielding. He goes hard for everything. Not that I don't, but after last year, the way that I fielded, I see him getting after it, and I'm like, yeah, man, I need to get back to that. He brings energy. Watch him. He's constantly talking to the pitcher. Let's go. You got this guy. Nasty pitch. I'm like, man, I used to do that when I was a young player for the Rockies. I kind of slowly got away from it. Now I'm super quiet. He's constant energy. Everybody feeds off of it. Some teams might think he's talking trash, but he's really just talking to the pitcher all the time. I think it's pretty cool. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Alex, I think this is a really intriguing comment from Nolan Arenado because when as a young player, you are able to win over the guy that appears to be the most skeptical player inside of that locker room of the young guys, that speaks pretty loudly of the presence that you already have at this point in your career as a 21-year-old shortstop. What did you make when you read these quotes from Nolan Arenado earlier today?
I mean, you've got a influencer in that clubhouse right now in Masyn Winn. You've got a guy that seems to draw everybody in just with his attitude, his energy, and frankly, we learned last year that those guys are needed. I think what Nolan Arenado said last year about the younger players was dictated off of certain guys who brought a negative attitude throughout the season. And I mean, I really feel like it was a lot of Jack Flaherty and Tyler O'Neill. It's no coincidence that those two guys were gone. I don't know if you'd consider them young guys, but in Nolan Arenado's mind, you're thinking like, okay, two guys that think they're a part of this core, but have attitude problems, and that drags everybody else down. And now you're talking about a clubhouse that has a Masyn Winn, who seemingly has a ton of energy that draws a lot of people in. Lars Nootbaar is the exact same way. It seems, and if you're going to take Nolan Arenado at his word, and frankly, I don't know why you wouldn't when you look at how the team's playing defensively and their pitching's working, it seems like a young attitude like a Masyn Winn is bringing the best out of a lot of guys. Not on the offensive side, but everywhere else.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think what it shows is that the Cardinals and in that locker room are buying into kind of Wynn's swagger, I would say. You know, I think they realized last year that last year was just kind of a vanilla team, you know? And I think, and look, I don't blame them. I mean, they lost 90-some-odd games. Like, you're not going to have fun when you're losing 90 games. But really, the only guys that provided energy were Nootbaar by the end of the season with the pepper grinder, and that was it. Now you've got Nootbaar, you've got Donovan, who played the game the right way. Donovan plays super hard, brings a little bit of energy as well. And now you've got Masyn Winn on the infield that does it as well. And I think what Arenado, to your point, Alex, I still am a little critical of his comment of like the young guys and they've got to know their role. Man, the young guys, he's starting to buy into it now. Now that the Cardinals are playing better baseball, not winning baseball yet, but playing better baseball, it's easier for Nolan Arenado that is struggling still to say, you know what, I like the way that Masyn Winn guy plays next to me. He plays the game hard. He brings some swagger. I'm willing to buy into that, and I think that's a good sign that you're starting to see some of the older veterans come into that. And you also got Contreras as well that brings that kind of energy as well to the team.
They've been missing this, man. This is the exact kind of player that they have been lacking. Somebody that has this kind of spark, this kind of energy, this kind of swagger, honestly, about him, like a level of confidence that kind of teeters on arrogant versus just overly confident. And I like that. I prefer my players to have a little bit of that in them.
It does it a lot like what Bader had.
A little bit, yeah, but with better game.
Yeah, with the actual contributions. Because I think for the longest time, the swagger was there with Bader, and he'd back it up with his defense, but offensively, there was nothing there.
And I think he talks more. That's the other thing. Like, Bader felt Bader, by the time he left St. Louis, I think had really grown into being a leader inside of the clubhouse. I don't know that he was that same guy early on in his career. I think he arrived with a lot of swagger, a lot of confidence, but it was different inside of the clubhouse than it was. Like, you could feel that with his game more than you could inside of the clubhouse.
Honestly,
presence.
tell me if I'm off on this, BK. Masyn Winn is a lot like Jake Neighbors.
Got some of that. I mean, different in terms of the style.
I mean, it's a different sport, obviously, but it just seems like when they talk, the way they...
Same level of, like, self-assuredness. They know who they are. They know exactly how they go about their business. And they back it up. Different styles. But Winn is definitely a lot more swagger to Winn than there is with Neighbors. Neighbors is like, this dude... The funny thing is, they're both throwback players. I think that's probably what you're getting at.
They're old school.
Masyn Winn could have played for the 1980s Cardinals. He could have played for Whitey Herzog.
Well, he did. He said that he's Ozzie Smith, and then they've got, you know...
Jake Neighbors could have played for the Blues in the 1980s as well. Like, he could have played back when the game was... He could have played with, like, Keith Kachuk. He could have played with David Backus. He would have fit in with those styles. Ken Hitchcock. He would have fit in with those styles of teams. And I think that's what feels similar about them, is that they remind you of the teams that you watched growing up that were your favorite version of the Cardinals or your favorite version of the Blues. And there's value in that, man. There's value as an organization to having that kind of a player. And it really shows itself when the guy that I think it's fair to say was the most hesitant to buy into this youth movement starts to make comments nationally of, man, not only am I buying into this kid, but he's making me better. The thing that I do better than any third baseman maybe in the history of the sport, this shortstop that I'm playing next to on a day-to-day basis is making me do it better. I can't imagine a higher compliment for Masyn Winn than what you just heard from Nolan Arenado to Ken Rosenthal. With Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. Jeremy Rutherford coming up next year on 101 ESPN.
All right, BK, so I've got the Circa Sports Illinois app pulled up, and I'm isolating one game, and I'm doing my famous Ferrario parlay on one game. It's the Maple Leafs and the Bruins. The Maple Leafs think they're all big and tough. Making a goaltending change ain't going to matter. Here's the Ferrario parlay for you and why you need to do it on the Circa Sports app so you could get more money. Marner scoring a goal. The Maple Leafs keep it within one. I think it's going to be close. I'm saying Marchand has over 2.5 shots on goal and under 5.5 total goals in this game. All of that right there on a FanDuel app, plus 1750. On Circa Sports for that parlay, plus 1950.
Nice. You love getting the bigger payouts over on the Circa Sports app, and that is why I exclusively bet through Circa Sports. They recommend you check and shop your lines on other apps. They think you're going to come back because you're going to get more money when you bet with Circa Sports. They're also not going to limit you. I saw somebody else on DraftKings earlier today, Alex. They were trying to bet a prop. It was a $10 limit for them. That's not going to happen to you over at Circa Sports. So download the Circa Sportsbook app today, and when you do, you're going to be winning a bunch more money than you will elsewhere. If you or someone you know may have a problem with gambling, call 1-800-GAMBLER or text ILGAMB to 833-234.
Terre Haute They Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. The Cardinals back in action today as they've got a doubleheader with the Detroit Tigers. 2:40 for first pitch in game one. Kyle Gibson gets the start for St. Louis versus Jack Flaherty with the Detroit Tigers. This Sports Center update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, the independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
Alongside Alex Ferrario, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. We are always happy to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline when Jeremy Rutherford is on the other side of the line. Blues insider for The Athletic. You can follow him on Twitter at JP Rutherford. JR, appreciate the time as always, man. Let's start with some rumors, I guess you could say, from last night. Blues seemingly interested, connected to a couple of Swedish players. Have you heard anything on this? How much should we read into it, JR?
Yeah, no, I think there's definitely something there, and probably would hear something from the Blues at some point. Usually when those European signings get reported a couple days earlier, the Blues are quick to make it official. So I think we'll see something with Marcus Silvegaard. I think he's a guy who played in Europe last year, and Alex and I spoke today on the Last Minute Blues podcast talking about this. We've seen this before in the past. You go back to 2015. You had Joakim Lindstrom was a player that the Blues brought over from Sweden. He was friends with Alexander Steen. Now Steen, still scouting with the team and helping the team in the front office, has a pulse for those guys in Europe. And so I think we'll see that signing, and these players will potentially come over and either be depth pieces for the Blues or guys who can play in Springfield. I wouldn't get overly excited until they come over and we see what we got, because typically guys in their mid-20s who weren't drafted have put up good numbers in Europe. It doesn't always translate here in North America.
JR is Buzz Killington, just like BK's Buzz Killington. Just gets us all upset about everything, no matter what.
I was reading Alex's scouting reports that he sent us last night. It sounded like he was basically Jaden Schwartz 2.0 that was coming over.
You know what? I always say this, that I try to put things in context. I do. And then watch. One of these guys will come over and light it up. Why didn't other teams sign this guy over in Sweden?
So you'd say, though, JR, off-season over for Doug Armstrong, right? You got those done? You're not really worried about anything else?
Yeah, once you get those two depth pieces from Europe, I think you're pretty much done. And, I would think that Doug would just put those feet up on the desk here for the rest of the summer and come back with the same team next year.
So, JR, we did talk about this on the podcast earlier, but for our listeners, it's an update on the coaching search that you have heard.
Yeah, and so I think right now it's still in a holding pattern. I know Drew Bannister has gone back to Thunder Bay, Ontario, where he lives in the off season, and he's just kind of awaiting word on his future. I've heard, but don't hold me to this, that it could be down to just the two candidates, Bannister and someone else. We know that Doug Armstrong said that he was going to wait until the playoffs, until he could talk to a few potential candidates. Who are those candidates? You look at the head coaches in all these series. Jim Montgomery with Boston, could he be a fit? For sure. But he's got one more year left on his contract in Boston. You look at Sheldon Keefe, they could lose to Boston and get knocked out. I don't know that the Blues, I don't think they would be interested in a Sheldon Keefe. And, hey, you might as well shoot for the stars. People have said to me, how come you're not mentioning John Cooper? They just lost to Florida last night. The one thing I go back to in Doug Armstrong's season-ending wrap-up is he said, we're just not that cup contending team right now. We're not looking for a coach that's going to give us that extra 3 or 4% to push us over the edge and be that cup contending team. We're looking for a guy who's going to be willing to deal with mistakes from the young players. So I don't know if John Cooper, who also has term left on his contract, is that guy either.
So you think that they're down to one other candidate right now, JR?
Well, I that's just kind of the scuttlebutt. So you're not at the rink, but you're making calls. You're trying to find out where it's at. Doug said that he would like to have something done by June 1st. So, the rumor mill, two candidates, Bannister and somebody else. We've talked about David Carl at the University of Denver, but of course you guys talked about it last week that he agreed to take on that World Junior Championship team for the U.S. So that would seemingly take him out, except for there is precedent with that. The North Dakota coach in the early 2000s accepted that World Junior Championship job and then backed out of it to take a Columbus Blue Jackets assistant job. So could David Carl back out and take the Blues job? I suppose, but you would think that if it were going to be Carl, that something would likely be done. So I look at these playoff coaches, and the one thing, I told Alex today that we can't forget, too, is that we're not just looking at head coaches with these playoff teams. There could be a candidate that Doug Armstrong has his eye on in the playoffs who is an assistant coach, maybe with some NHL experience.
Jeremy Rutherford is our guest here on 101 ESPN. Jer, on that note of the coaches and what they could potentially mean for the Blues heading into 2024, it's something we're going to talk about a little bit later on today. As I've watched especially the Eastern Conference games, you get the sense that it is the heavier team that is winning the majority of these games. They are winning with a cycle play. Like it's everything that Craig Berube talked about for 3 or 4 years here in St. Louis about the way that you can win in the postseason. It's working, especially on the Eastern Conference side of things. How much influence, in your opinion, does the coach have in the style of play that your team ends up going with, as opposed to that just being a result of the players that you've put together?
Well, I think this. I think that you can say the coach has an influence and an impact on what the team looks like in terms of the style, but it takes time to put that type of roster together. And I think that if you look at this Blues roster right now, they've been one of the best transition teams in terms of rush chances the past couple of years. You're building around a Kyrou and a Thomas at this point, on your roster. And sure, you can still fill in the bottom six or your bottom 4D with heavier players and try to play that 2019 style. And everybody points to Craig Berube as that's the style that he wants to play. But let's say you brought in that type of coach right now. How long would it take? A year, 2 years, 3 years to be able to go out and assemble that type of roster. Remember, all these contracts that we're talking about trying to get rid of, they're not going away this summer in terms of all of them. So I think that the roster kind of dictates the style, at least for the time being, until you can transition into a different type of roster if that's what you want to do, more so than the coach's style does.
Jer, we're starting to see some of these series come to a conclusion in the first round, and obviously the coaching side of it's one thing, but you look at some of the rosters and what could take place if Toronto gets bounced, with the Capitals being ousted and maybe the New York Islanders. Do you see any significant changes to teams that are going to get bounced in the first round of the playoffs roster-wise that the Blues might be able to capitalize on?
Yeah, I think that's always the case. I know for a couple of years now, every time Toronto lost in the first round, Blues fans said that you got to go get, those top four guys, one of those top four guys. And, at some point it's Nylander, now it's Mitch Marner. Like, definitely Toronto has to do something. So they're going to have to break that up. Obviously, Matthews is going nowhere. So, is Mitch Marner a guy who's going to be available at the end of the season? I guess possibly. Are the Blues, who are in a retool, in a position to give Toronto what it wants, or are they even in a position to start to put your eggs in one player's basket or two players' basket moving forward here? I don't know that they are, and some fans will say, "Why not go do it? Go get this guy. You'll be competitive next year." They're still in that focus of drafting and developing and trying to get better over the course of the next 2 or 3 years. And I always remind people, don't always go spend that money right now. Make sure you have that money available in a couple of years when your other guys are ready, the guys that are coming up, and then you can go add that piece to kind of help put you over the top. And you won't have that money if you go spend it now. So it's fun fantasy land talk to think about those types of players right now. I don't know that Doug Armstrong's going to make that move unless this guy is 25, 26, 27. He can be in your core for the next several years.
I'm going to ask an honest question, JR, and you can totally scream at me if you need to. Is Mitch Marner $5 million better than Pavel Buchnevich?
I don't think so, and I think what we've seen in the playoffs here, and Mitch is obviously uber talented, but I think what we've seen in the playoffs here, and people can talk about injuries or illness. I know a lot of those Toronto players are dealing with something. I haven't seen it in this series, and I'm a big fan of Pavel Buchnevich because I think just comparing him to Marner, maybe he isn't as talented offensively, but I think he does a lot of other things well. So I'm not saying that I'm in the camp that would give Buchnevich $8 million for the next 8 years, but I definitely would put Buchnevich in a category of signing him potentially because of that all-around game and what he can bring the Blues ahead of a Mitch Marner type.
It seems like Marner, you look at it, Alex, defensively, that's a big part of what he brings to the table. And points-wise, goals are basically the same as Pavel Buchnevich over the past 3 years. He's a little bit better in assist numbers, but he's also played with better teammates. Alex, do you disagree with this?
I look at it, and JR, I'm not pushing back. I look at it as you got a guy who's hit 90 points 3 times and 85 points once, and the most Pavel Buchnevich has got to, if I'm not mistaken, 76. Is 76. So I look at it as $5 million difference. You're talking about a guy who could get to 100 points versus a guy that maybe could get to 85.
Well, what if I put Buchnevich with the line mates that Marner is playing with?
Then you're talking about 100 points.
Exactly.
And Marner,
so is that a situation thing or a
here's the
thing?
difference for me, JR. Marner is more of a playmaker, where I think Pavel Buchnevich is a two-way forward who can score goals. And if you substitute a goal scorer with a playmaker, you're taking out a 30-goal scorer.
I agree, but, I prefaced it by saying Marner's the better offensive player, I think, and can create more. Not to say that Pavel Buchnevich can't, but I also look at what does this team not have? And do you not have a Mitch Marner for sure? But, there's not enough Pavel Buchneviches around the league. And I think if you build around him, he can be that type of player who is versatile. And I will say this, though. I think we need to see more of the feisty Pavel Buchnevich that we thought he was going to be. And I think that he was in New York. And, does he do it on the odd night and bring that element to his game? I think he can do it a lot more. But I think, if the Blues were in that upper echelon of teams and contending and getting into the playoffs, maybe that brings out that element in him. So, you look at the roster, what don't you have? Obviously, this Blues roster could use both of those players. But I think that Buchnevich kind of brings something that you'd really be missing if you didn't have him.
Here's the difference for me, though, and why I would lean more towards Marner. Marner's 26, Buchnevich is 29.
Totally fair.
And that's 3 more years in your core.
But $13 million versus 8.
I don't know if he gets 13 mil.
$12 million versus 8. He's at 11 right now.
Yeah. For 26 years old at 90-plus points, I would go the extra $4 million for a top-line player that I know is a top-line player. Absolutely. We hand those out like candy canes at Christmas time.
Well, and that's what I go back to the original question is the $5 million difference.
Yeah.
I think that a lot of people are going to take Marner probably, 7 times out of 10 in that scenario, maybe even more. But when you phrase the question, $4 or $5 million difference, that's the key. What's Doug Armstrong's MO since he took over the GM chair is we're not paying superstars. We're paying a lot of guys handsomely. And I think that's what they have in Buchnevich, and they would continue to have moving forward, as a relatively well-paid player, but you're not talking 12 or 13 million. And hey, let's not forget, I know it's a little ways off, but the Snuggeruds and the Dvorskys, those guys, you're going to hope that you have to pay them a lot more in the next 3 to 4 years, and that's going to be tough to do if you're paying a guy $12-13 million.
Hey, JR, it's going to be good talking with you about all of these different possibilities throughout the course of the offseason. Hopefully we get some more word on the coaching staff decisions here pretty soon. Appreciate the time as always. We'll be reading you over at The Athletic, following you along on Twitter as well at JP Rutherford. We'll talk with you again next week, my friend.
Yep, sounds good. Thanks.
See you, JR.
Yeah, that's JR. Appreciate his time as always here on BK and Ferrario. I've got a follow-up question for Alex that I want to get to based on the conversation we were just having about Marner versus Buchnevich. We'll get to that on the other side and some of your questions as well at 314-399-9646 here on BK and Ferrario. It is time to unlock your inner champion, and the place to go for that is Victory Men's Health. You can check them out. They have 4 great locations across the St. Louis area: O'Fallon, Illinois, O'Fallon, Missouri, Town and Country, and the newest location to open up just about 6 weeks ago in Sunset Hills, Missouri as well. So you could go to one of their brick and mortar with those 4 spots, or check them out today at victorymenshealth.com. When you go there, they've got some frequently asked questions that you can read all about. You can learn more about all of the different services that they have to offer for you, whether it is erectile dysfunction, male testosterone. If you want to get your testosterone checked, the place to go is Victory Men's Health. And the reason for that is because they're not just going to check for your testosterone. They're going to do an entire micronutrient test where they're going to have this lab draw kit. They take it out, and then they will find out exactly what it is that you could use. Is it something else that's maybe affecting the way that you feel when you wake up in the beginning of the day? Or is it low testosterone? Whatever it is, they can check for it over at Victory Men's Health. Check them out today. 4 great locations and at victorymenshealth.com. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. We were just talking to Jeremy Rutherford in our last segment. If you missed any of it, check it out on the podcast page. 101ESPN.com and the free 101 ESPN app is where you go to find it. It's all presented by
Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
And Alex, we kind of stumbled on a conversation about Pavel Buchnevich versus Mitch Marner. Marner is, I think, going to be traded this offseason. They can't move on from Austin Matthews and shouldn't move on from Austin Matthews. They're not going to move on from Tavares because he has a no-trade clause and who's going to take that contract?
He's not leaving Toronto.
They
he's made it clear.
just signed William Nylander. There's one other real move that they have that they could bring in legitimate assets for, and that's Mitch Marner. He's a really good player. 26 years old, will be 27 next year. Consistent point-per-game producer. And oh, by the way, a Selke Trophy nominee seemingly every year of his career.
And I don't think he's going to get $13 million. I think if you're him, you ask for it from Toronto because they handed it out to Austin Matthews. But I think I saw Frank Saravalli put on Daily Faceoff. Like, you're talking about probably $11 to $11.5 million a year.
You think he's going to take a pay cut?
No, because
He's at 11.9 right now.
Yeah, I don't think somebody's going to give him $13 million. I think
he'll get 12.
Maybe, but
either way,
even $12 million, I'll take that over $13.5 million.
Sure.
And I know that sounds crazy, but 1.5. I mean, that's a fourth liner for you.
The reason why I wanted to bring this up is because if I told you Pavel Buchnevich 3 years from now is seen as a better player around the NHL than Mitch Marner, how do you think we got there? Like, if I told you the end point of the conversation, what do you think happens between now and then to get us to that place? What is required around Pavel
Was an
Buchnevich?
impactful player in the playoffs to win a Stanley Cup. I think that's what the bugaboo is going to be on Mitch Marner moving forward, of like, great player but can never get it done in the playoffs. And I think that's what hinders a lot of people. People were saying that about Alex Ovechkin for the longest time. Vladimir Tarasenko, people were talking about that. Great player but can't get it done in the playoffs until he took over the playoffs and they won a series, and then he was a big piece right. I think for you to get to the point where Pavel Buchnevich, you're like, yeah, better player because of the money than what Mitch Marner got, you're going to be looking at playoff success.
I would look at it as line mate. I think he just needs a stud with him. Like, if you told me 3 years from now that Jimmy Snuggerud became everything we were hoping for and then some, and it's a line of Snuggerud, Robert Thomas, and Pavel Buchnevich, and to your point, like, yes, requirement, you got to have playoff success because that's where people really make their name in this league.
But Buch played with Thomas this year, like, almost all season, and the points were not there.
I think you need another winger with him. I think you need a full line to make that thing work and to click the way that we're talking about. I think if you got a sniper, it opens up some space for those guys to operate underneath.
That's why I find it interesting, because if we go down the path of the future line, like a number one line, Neighbors is on it, no doubt, with Thomas. You hope Snuggerud gets there. But if I've got a net front presence and I've got my playmaker, I need a goal scorer. And I don't know if Pavel Buchnevich is that.
I don't know.
I don't know if Marner's that either.
That's the thing. That's what I was going to say is I think they're actually very similar stylistically. Marner probably a little bit better as a creator, although I do think Pavel Buchnevich gets unfairly knocked for that. I think he's a really good creator for others when he's got a stud with him.
And that's why I feel like if you want to go down the path of Buch, I think Buch is a 30-goal scorer consistently.
And that's what Marner is.
Exactly. I think you could get more with that if you put another playmaker with him. And that's why I get to the Marner thing where it's like, I don't know if it's Buch for Marner. I think it's Kyrou for Marner. That's where I think the difference is. And then if you do that.
But then do you have too few finishers? Because this is where it becomes like I think Kyrou has 40-goal potential.
And that's where you're relying, if you make that move, you're relying on Bolduc, Dvorsky, and Snuggerud to be your finishers. And if you're telling me that I've got two elite playmakers with three young, cost-controlled finishers, and I've got Jake Neighbors, would you rather have that, or would you rather have one elite playmaker, one guy that's kind of in the middle, and then a guy that you're hoping becomes an elite finisher?
The tough part is there's zero chance Toronto is interested in a Kyrou for Marner swap.
I would agree with that.
No chance. Not just, like, the money makes sense for them. They need more. We're talking about GM for the Blues. Yeah. They need more of that.
I don't think they would be interested in just Kyrou, because if I'm training Marner, the two things I'm looking for, is a stud goaltender or a stud defenseman. Only way I'm trading Marner.
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. Alex has some news that we'll get to here in just a moment as well. From the 314, simple question, guys. Do you believe that the Cardinals will make the playoffs before Mo's current contract is over? I believe yes. I believe they'll make the playoffs this year.
He's got one more year after this year?
Yeah.
I say no. I don't think they make it this year, and I think you take a drastic turn next year because Goldschmidt won't be back and you're relying heavily on your younger players.
I think I would lean no as well. I'm not sure they're a playoff team this year. I think they're borderline, but I would take the field currently. So I would say no, and then just next year's so up in the air. Like, what do they do if they miss again? Do they just try and tear it down? Maybe Mo steps aside if they miss the playoffs again. Like, he may not even finish the contract. Like, what's the rotation look like? Like, there's a ton of questions up in the air for what happens next season, so I'd say no.
From the 314, guys, would you consider re-signing David Perron this offseason? Yes, but I don't think they will.
Yeah, I don't think he's going to be a free agent. I think Detroit's going to bring him back because of the reason that the Blues want to bring him back. He's a really good leader, and you can't let that player go. If he's available, I would.
Same, 100%.
And final thing here, Alex, you've got a little bit of news to pass along from the St. Louis Blues.
Yeah, so we brought it up with JR, but the reports last night were a couple of guys over in Sweden that potentially could sign a contract with the Blues. Well, Armstrong and the Blues announced that they've signed Marcus Silvegaard to a one-year entry-level contract and defenseman Samuel Johansson to a two-year entry-level contract. Think of these guys as depth signings. I think the person I was talking to last night essentially said any signings are going to be headed to Springfield unless they impress in training camp. The Johansson is a depth defensive signing. He's a right-handed shot. The Silvegaard is the one that's interesting because he had
200 penalty minutes in 300 regular season games.
Yeah, well, he's got an attitude problem, but frankly, I think that's a good thing for this team. He should be BK's favorite player, to be honest with you. Yeah. But he's 24 years old. He had 23 goals last year with the best team in the Swedish Hockey League, and that was the second most goals in the Swedish Hockey League. And
I like this guy.
I mean, the guy's a goal scorer. And apparently he's got an attitude problem, so I don't know why BK wouldn't like him.
I want to see him Hulk up.
This, by the way, this screams Alexander Steens watched this kid play in the Swedish Hockey League and said, you need to sign this guy. Plays right wing. And as we know with the Blues.
10 games combined for those two next year for the Blues.
Oh, I don't think that defenseman plays any. I would say under.
Yeah. I don't think you see him.
The difference with the player, I think you see him at some point because this to me is like, you don't want to go back to the Jakub Verana well, so you say, why not bring a dude in who might be able to score? To JR's point, like the player that he talked about, Joakim Lindstrom, that was a player that they brought in that was kind of a depth piece from Sweden that didn't have much success and wasn't drafted. This is a kid that just led, and I say kid because he's 24 years old, he just led the Swedish Hockey League, which is one of the toughest leagues to play in goals. That's
the same league that Dvorsky was struggling to get on the ice, right?
Yes, that's the league that Dvorsky was struggling to get on the ice and score goals in. And this kid just led the league in it.
And he was playing for a really good team. The team that he played for over the past 4 seasons won the title twice. That was research that I did last night.
I think it was
on Swedish Hockey League.
Get in on the Silvegaard train, my man.
I think his line mates
over
carried
under
him.
5 goals for the Blues next year, Alex.
Oh, that one I would take under. I'd say he plays more than 10 games.
Okay.
I'd say the under on 5 goals.
Coming up
Can't
next,
score on the fourth line, we've learned.
314 399.
Did I catch you off guard there, man?
Yeah. 399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Who has been the Cardinals MVP so far this season? At least one publication says it's been Sonny Gray. Has he pitched enough to get that kind of acclaim? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, so who would you have as the Cardinals MVP so far through 1 month of their season? For The Athletic, they put their MVP as Sonny Gray. Said despite the early signing of Sonny Gray was terrific from any vantage point, the right-hander is showing it right now. Despite a tardy start to the season, he leads the team in wins, carries a 1.1 ERA, within shouting distance of the most famous in team history. He has also struck out 8 guys for each one that he's walked. The Cardinals' April MVP is in a black and white decision. It is Sonny Gray.
Call me crazy, but you might. I would say Lance Lynn's more an MVP at this point of the season than Sonny Gray.
Yeah, I think you're crazy for that.
Okay, cool. That's fine. How many starts?
What's your case? What's your case?
Lance Lynn has been more than what we expected any pitcher to be for this team other than Sonny Gray. And Sonny Gray started the season on the injured list. Lance Lynn started 2 more games than him, and in those 2 games pitched well against the Dodgers. And who was the second opponent that he went up against to begin the season with? Wasn't that Miami? Or who was the second?
Miami got rocked by.
Miami got rocked.
Yeah,
but
Miami and then Philly.
And then the Phillies. Okay, so
if you get rocked by Miami, you can't be an MVP.
That's fine, but against the Phillies and against the Dodgers, you were very competitive. You lost both of those games, but I'd say that's a team and manager problem.
You beat the Dodgers.
Not when he started. Oh, that was the rain delay. He didn't really beat the Dodgers. So I think he was going to blow up in that game. Regardless,
didn't give up a run.
I looked at this.
Bases were low to win. Poof.
I look at this like Sonny Gray is exactly what I thought he was going to be, but who has been more impactful for the entirety of the season up until this point? I would argue Lance Lynn over Sonny Gray.
Interesting. I would agree with he's probably been the most impressive player based on expectations coming into the season. Sure. Maybe him and Winn. I think Masyn Winn would be in that conversation because I thought this guy would hit like 210. To me, the MVP is Willson Contreras.
I was going to say, I'm not on board with Lance being the MVP, by the way. I'm just saying he's more of an MVP than Sonny Gray.
You know what? Mike's off.
No, listen.
I think my MVP would be Willson Contreras.
Yes.
Because I saw the team without Sonny Gray, and they were still a competitive team. You know, and Sonny Gray's been awesome in his 3-4 starts that he's been back with the Cardinals now that he's back from the hamstring injury. He's been great, and I'm not taking that away from him, but he has missed a chunk of the season, and the Cardinals were able to still kind of stay alive without Sonny Gray. And they had Zach Bleepin Thompson throwing like 88 out there, and they were still able to survive that. I think it's Willson Contreras. Guys, if you plucked Willson Contreras from this lineup, they would be the Houston Astros this year. They would be a team that is 10 games below 500, and we would already be waving the white flag on the season because he is the only guy that is consistently hitting. Everybody else has had, like, Arenado had like a nice 5-game stretch. Goldie's looked better. Newport had like the game he returned from. Gorman hit a walk-off home run. Nobody's been as consistent as Willson Contreras has been at the plate, and he's got the highest WAR. What is it good for on the team?
Nothing.
At 1.3. Thank you. But I think that matters. I think, and he's doing this, by the way, with a hand that is hurt. So I think Willson Contreras, without a doubt in my mind, is the MVP for the first month for the St. Louis Cardinals.
And his defense significantly improved.
I'd agree with that.
You want to talk about defense? I'll give you a player that it's interesting. We all had a different guy.
I was Willson Contreras, yeah. I was just stating my case. I think Lance Lynn was more of an MVP than Sonny Gray.
I think the MVP so far this year has been Masyn Winn. He's
all aboard this win train.
He's hitting .310. He's getting on base. He doesn't really strike out. He hits well with runners in scoring position. He adds value with his speed on the base paths, something that we cannot say for Willson Contreras. Value on the base paths, not exactly there. Defensively, imagine where this team would be if they didn't get the double plays that Masyn Winn is turning this year. They, I believe, are top 5 in Major League Baseball so far this season in double plays turned. Winn is a big part of that. And if you look at any of the nerdy, stupid defensive statistics so far this year, they will tell you that Masyn Winn has been a net negative defensively for the Cardinals. This is exhibit 5,425 as to why those stats are just complete nonsense, and you can disregard them at this point in the regular season. Masyn Winn has been outstanding defensively for the Cardinals. He has shored up a spot that was a net negative at times last year for them, and he's doing it at the plate as well. My biggest frustration with Masyn Winn has nothing to do with nothing to do with him, and everything to do with the way that he's been utilized. I wish that there were fewer days off, but that's a back issue. He's playing through pain, something that we have not always seen by St. Louis Cardinals in the past, by the way. He's finding a way to push through it. He is a guy that I believe should be hitting higher in the order right now. I would like to see Masyn Winn batting in your top 5 in the lineup on a day-in, day-out basis. I think he's one of your best hitters. Even right now, while he is technically slumping, quote-unquote, at the plate, he's not hitting for a lot of average, not hitting for a lot of slug over the past couple of weeks. He's still finding ways to get on base. even in this stretch, he's getting on base like 32% of the time, Alex. I think Masyn Winn has been everything I was hoping for and then some. I think he's been your best and most important player so far this season. He would be my MVP thus far.
I would argue that they're co-MVPs, to be honest with you. I think both have been massively impactful for this team to keep their head close to 500 and not fall into a complete down spiral. I mean, you talk about clutch hitting, both have been able to come up with big plays. You talk about big time defense, whether it's Masyn Winn's play at shortstop or Willson Contreras finding ways to significantly improve behind the plate, working with these pitchers. The base running definitely goes towards Masyn Winn when it comes to Willson Contreras, but I think both provide the attitude. Without those two players, which we came into the season saying Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado were going to be the two-headed monster that needed this team to survive, Willson Contreras and Masyn Winn have now become that for this team this season.
So I did want to bring up the lineup. So if you're going to listen to the lineup game later on today, feel free to disregard. Just turn your radio down for like the next 30 seconds or so. All right, we good?
No, that was like 10 seconds.
1. So the Cardinals have put out their lineup today, and they've decided to go with Lars Nootbaar in center field. Brendan Donovan leading off, Contreras, Newt, Arenado, Goldie, Burleson, Gorman, Winn, and Herrera. That's your lineup 1 through 9. Fastlane will play the game later on today. They're going to be on before the game, so we'll let them have the honors. Alex, Lars Nootbaar being in center field, I don't know if this is going to be a one-off because it's, the doubleheader, or if this is going to be something that we see more of because the team feels that it needs to find offense somewhere. How do you feel about it if it does become something that's more consistent? If you do see more of Newt, Donovan, and Burleson potentially in the outfield.
Just to follow up with that, Katie Wu tweeted out saying that the doubleheader factored into more of this offense versus defense layouts with Nootbaar in center field with Gibson, who's a ground ball guy, and Siani gets Matz, who's more of a fly guy. I'm fine with it at this point because as much as you've been winning games with defense and the small ball, man, you've got to start getting this offense going. And if anything, it doesn't work for a week, the offense doesn't get going, and the defense is causing you to lose games, then like we talked about yesterday, you go right back to it. And now you know what your upgrade is going to have to be throughout the season. You've got to find more offense at some point. I don't know if you're able to pull that off. We'll have to wait to find out if the Cardinals do. But I'd be fine with them leaning more into this because how long are we going to keep going through this season where you're playing 500 baseball and you keep saying, well, they're great if the offense can just get going. At some point, the offense has to get going.
Yeah, I think they still need to stick defense-minded first. And it doesn't really change a lot of the lineup because they can have Burley DH and still have a good defensive alignment. Nootbaar in right, Donovan in left, and Siani in center. And in theory, the only guy that is a negative on the Cardinals in terms of like when you think about them as not being an offensive threat is Siani. Masyn Winn's an offensive guy at this point, so now you're just to one guy in the lineup that it doesn't bother you. Yeah, the offense has to get going, but defense and small ball never slump, and I think you need to stick with that. If you truly believe that the offense is going to hit, and I think some of the guys in the lineup are going to, some guys are going to, not as to the level I think we were going to see at the beginning of the year, like Goldie and Arenado, but I think they're all going to at some point start hitting. Stick with this defensive mindset first. Give it a little bit more runway. I would go another 2 weeks, probably defensive-minded oriented. And let's just be honest, like, there's nothing that they can do to just pluck a guy in. And, like, Burley now in the lineup doesn't mean the offense is going to start hitting. So don't give up defense because of that.
That's my thing. You can do this on days when Contreras is your DH. That's really it. Because you have to get Contreras in your lineup. And the way to do so is by putting him as your designated hitter. And when he is your DH, I would like to see Burleson in the lineup against right-handed pitchers still because he's been hitting really well over the last couple of weeks. So, yeah, I get that, especially when you've got somebody like Kyle Gibson on the mound who's over 50% in terms of his ground ball rate. This makes a lot of sense for the first game today. Just don't get too stuck to it. Don't make this a thing where when Willson Contreras is behind the plate and you can put Burleson at DH, don't then pigeonhole Ivan Herrera into the lineup, who hasn't been hitting lately. Your lineup is going to go as far as your big guys are going to take you. Eventually, Arenado, Goldie, Newt, Donovan, those four have to hit. And if they don't, then the lineup isn't going to work. And that doesn't matter if you lean on defense in the outfield or offense or whatever. Eventually, your big guys got to hit. And that's what's going to ultimately determine the outcome of this season. So I'm with you, T-Bone. Don't rely on this too heavily, but I'm fine with it for one game when you've got Kyle Gibson on the mound and you've got your backup catcher in there to be able to get Willson Contreras in the lineup. That's where it should be taking place, is this exact circumstance. All right, coming up in about 15 minutes or so, Is there value in hiring a coach who has been through this kind of a retool before? There's one name that really stands out on the market right now that would fit into that criteria. We'll get into that coming up in about 15 minutes. Better to forget it next year on 101 ESPN.
Ooh, hoo, hoo, hoo.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Bet It or Forget It. You give us a scenario. We will tell you if we are betting it here on BK and Ferrario. Guys, Bet It or Forget It. Travis Kelce, I don't know if you saw the news yesterday, officially signed a new 2-year contract. It sounds like these will be the final 2 seasons of his NFL career. Bet it or forget it. He wins at least one more Super Bowl in the next 2 seasons.
Bet it. I think they win it this year. I think they do the three-peat.
Man,
I'm going to forget it because I just don't want to see it happen.
I don't either, man. I want my my Lions or my Texans to do it, but I'm just not going to play dumb with this. I know what's going to happen.
You've got your Lions, your Texans, and your Bears. Oh, my.
Oh, I know. I'm so happy.
Great.
If only the Texans changed their name. Tigers? Houston Tigers? You can do that. It's fine.
I'm probably going to bet it, actually. Like, I want to forget it because I just don't want to see him win it again. And I just, at this point, I hate the Chiefs. Just despise them.
You and Donnie, man.
But, yeah, I'm
Donnie
with
is
Donnie,
still
even though
reeling from that last
even though I
week.
was willing to give him crap on it.
Are the Chiefs more or less, and the fan base, you can wrap that into it, right? More or less unlikable than the Patriots were? Like, did you hate the Patriots as much as you hate the Chiefs?
Oh, no, I hated the Patriots way more than the Chiefs.
I thought so, too, right?
But I think the cheating came into that, why you hated them so much.
And they beat your team.
And look, like we complain about them, the fan base is a lot more undesirable than the team. Because I think they got some guys that are fun. I love listening to the Kelsey's podcast. I think Travis Kelsey's fun. I don't like Pat Mahomes' crybaby tendencies a whole lot, but I do love Andy Reid. Makes a lot of sense,
That's
actually.
the funny thing is, like, the only one guy I really despise on that team is Mahomes.
Yeah, because he's a crybaby.
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah, he whines.
Every time he gets shoved to the
Interesting.
ground, he has to look at the ref.
A defensive tackle blows on him, and he's like, oh, he touched me.
Seeing him pout in that game where Tony was clearly offsides, like, that was a terrible look for Mahomes.
That was just he was frustrated.
Complaining
I
to
don't
the
care.
officials.
Cry me a river, Mahomes.
Yeah. You know who doesn't cry? Winners.
Yeah. You don't ever see Stafford crying, do you?
His wife does it all for him
But yeah, well, okay, but that's
on
different.
her podcast.
Taylor Swift does it for Travis.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Keep Stafford's wife out of your mouth. I don't even know her name, but
Keep my damn name.
Yeah,
Yeah, we got it.
And like, honestly, if I didn't know BK, and this isn't like a shot against BK, like, I wouldn't know a Chiefs fan. So, like, I wouldn't have the same, like, when he comes in the office, we're 6-0, we're not even trying yet. I'd go, oh, son of a, like, yeah, that's why I hate the Chiefs more.
You really are the
I
Toby.
obviously have to bet this.
Of course.
It is going to be not just a three-peat, but a four-peat for your Kansas City Chiefs.
See this right here.
And it's going to be amazing. By the way, one thing to clear up, there was some bad reporting that took place yesterday. Who could have seen this coming? People reported this as a extension. It's not. It's a raise. It's a 2-year contract that he already had 2 years left on his deal. They just bumped up the money. They gave him $4 million extra of basically what the Cardinals did with Adam Wainwright, where it's like, hey, thanks for being a great player for the history of your career.
Did their owner tell everybody, the fan base, though, that the salary cap was going to rise for the team?
They didn't say that. And it's not deferred. It's
They
all
didn't say
real
that
money.
payroll was actually going to go up in the next coming years?
It's a 2-year deal. There was bad reporting that took place earlier today. There's some confusion on that on the text line, so just heads up. Alex, what do you got for us?
Tone problem there, buddy. Better to forget it, guys. One of these two guys that the Blues just signed will be playing in the top 9 next season.
One of the two guys will be... No, forget it.
I don't think they're playing a game, so forget it.
I'm telling you, the Silva guard's going to be interesting. He's going
to have all kinds of attitude problems in the age.
Hey, you know what? We could use some attitude on this team. Just don't take penalties. The whole issue is going to be smaller ice versus larger ice and how you compete. But if you've got somebody who could score goals, that's essentially what they were looking for with Jakub Vrana or Kapanen or Blay, and none of them allowed the Blues to keep them in the lineup. And JR, who loves mocking me, texted and said, Adam Gaudette led the AHL in goals. How did that do for him? I would argue, JR, that was bad management of playing him on the fourth line. Your fourth line is set next year. I think if this kid looks good and can compete, I wouldn't be surprised if you're talking about a third-line opportunity to score goals.
I respect the take, but you're wrong.
I mean, Kapanen freaking played there all season, and it was terrible. Terrible.
You're right.
It was bad.
That's why they have to upgrade. T-Bone?
Guys,
They just did.
bet it or forget it.
I hate both of you.
Cardinals will have 4 Gold Glove winners this year.
Contreras, Winn.
Contreras.
I think Nolan Arenado's winning it this year. He's been
I do too. He
awesome
looks awesome.
I
defensively.
think Contreras is winning it, and you both can eat me.
Goldie?
Michael Ciani.
Who's your fourth?
Win.
3 infield. Who's your fourth?
Oh, I just brought up the scenario. I didn't say I was betting it.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out who the fourth would be.
I would think it would be Arenado, Goldie, Win, and then potentially
Contreras.
Donovan as the utility guy, or Edman if he comes back in time, or Newbar. Maybe Newbar gets one in right field.
Yeah, I'll forget it. I think they have 3 real candidates. I think they probably end up with 2. I don't know that it shouldn't be this way, but the offensive numbers really affects the voting on this sometimes. And if Goldie ends up having a down season offensively, I don't think that he'll end up winning it.
Yeah, and I think it's even going to be tough for Winn to win it. You know, there's just so many good shortstops in the National League. Like Mookie Betts, you heard of this guy? Yeah, he can play short.
The thing for him is because he takes so many chances and gets to so many balls, it is going to be hard for him to rate really well with the metrics.
Yeah.
And for certain people, that will be a problem.
Yeah, that's why I would forget it. But I brought it up because I think you can easily get to 3 if you think about it. Goldie, because he's done it before. Arnott done it before. Winn, because the eye test tells you he looks like a Gold Glover. The question was, where do you come up with that 4th one?
All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Better to Forget It. We'll get to a couple of these. Alex, Better to Forget It. The Blues head coaching job will be between Bannister and Rod Brind'Amour of the Carolina Hurricanes.
Forget it. I'd love the idea of Rod Brind'Amour, but I don't think Rod Brind'Amour is leaving Carolina.
I will forget it, and I think it is twofold. 1, I'm not sure he leaves Carolina, and 2, if he did, I don't think the Blues would be where he wants to go. I think if you're Rod Brind'Amour, any coach that's in the playoffs right now, honestly, Rod Brind'Amour, John Cooper, Jim Montgomery, why would I want to go to the Blues currently? Like, sure, I can understand, like, hey, man, well, look at the prospects they've got. Like, they're 3 years away. You know, 3 years, they could be a really good contender. Okay, well, call me in 3 years. Like, I don't want to go through that retool process if I'm any of them.
I think there are a couple of reasons. One is money. Money is always a factor in these kinds of situations.
Location is another part of it. Like, I think it's a desirable place for a
pressure
coach. / T-Revs.
Job security.
Yeah. Well, and look,
especially as an NHL head coach, we just talked about this a little bit ago, T-Bone. Like, dude, you just don't have much certainty anywhere that you get a job. You have a decent amount of that here in St. Louis.
And I mean, competitive nature is always around to where you look at it and you say, I can make them better. And what does that do to my status? And here's the thing, like, we downplay it because the Blues have been bad. They do have a lot of shiny new toys that a coach would look at and say, I want that. You got Robert Thomas. You've got a number 1 defenseman. You've got an awesome goaltender. And you're talking about the prospects that are in the system. And, again, the competitive nature, I could get the best out of Kyrou.
And you've got a good GM.
Yeah, and you got a very good GM that backs,
and an owner that lets his hockey people do their jobs.
And always spends to the cap.
And that's, like, those things that we just said, that's a huge part of a good job in the NHL. That being said, T-Bone, I'm with you. Like, if you're Rod Brind'Amour and Toronto says, blank check, what do you want? Go take the job.
Yeah.
Like, you got to take it, man. You got to take it. If you're, I don't know, whoever the next best candidate is that everybody wants, Toronto's the first one. That you wait to find out what they offer, and then you go see what everybody else has available to you. It's the Mecca, dude. It's like having the Dallas Cowboys available or the New York Yankees managerial job. Like, those are just, there's something different about them.
And the funny thing about Rod Brind'Amour is people are like, oh, he's drafted by the Blues. I don't think Rod Brind'Amour has ties to St. Louis where he's like, oh, I want to go back there. Like, the Blues traded him away. Spent a lot of his time with Carolina, obviously, most of his time in Philly, too. Like, I don't think it's to the point where he becomes available like Jim Montgomery and says, oh, I want to be back in St. Louis. Rod Brind'Amour is going to want to go where he can win and get paid.
Yeah.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for Better to Forget It. Better to Forget It, a team will waste a first-round pick on Bronny James with the hopes of eventually landing LeBron in free agency.
Bet it.
We were talking about this off air. I hate this, dude. This sucks.
Somebody in the back end of that first round is going to be like, cool, waste of a pick for us to win a championship if LeBron comes to us.
I'd actually forget it. If somebody burns a late first-round honor, it will be the Lakers. It will be the Lakers and their all-in effort. I think everybody else knows it's not worth, and it's weird saying this because, like, LeBron is still playing at an unbelievable level. Is it really worth for, like, one more final year of LeBron to waste a first-round pick potentially?
If you're the Knicks or the Clippers or the 76ers, I would waste a first round.
I'd rather trade that pick for, like, a KD who's crying out of Phoenix.
Yeah.
I'd rather have LeBron than KD.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's a 2-for-1 special.
It frustrates me that this is happening with Bronny because, I mean, he's had this his entire life. His name is Bronny James, right? He was always likely to go down this path.
Should have came up with a different name, man.
He was a real prospect. Like, as a recruit, he was a top 30 kid in the country. And that wasn't just because of the name. He could have been named Brevin Jacobson, and he would have been a top 50 recruit nationally. But his profile is not the kind of a guy that was likely to be a one and done. He was known as a good defensive player that could shoot it a little bit, and that was going to be his role at the next level. Those guys take a little while to make it work as a college basketball player. And so last year, he was, like the 7th player in their rotation for USC. And he had a health issue before the season as well that played into that. Is he worthy of being a first-round pick? No, of course not. Nobody should expect him to be. But I do think it's a little bit unfair to the kid that he's got all this pressure put on him, and the family has brought this upon him, and I hate it, but he's got all this pressure, and somebody's going to take him in the first round probably, or at least in the second, because of his dad. I think he was going to be an NBA player at some point. It shouldn't be right now. It sucks, dude. I don't like the way that this is going for him. But to answer the question directly, will somebody take him in the first round? Yes, I believe somebody will, and I believe that team will be the Lakers. I don't think LeBron is leaving. I think he's going to be back with the Lakers next year. I think they're going to change their coach, and I think they're going to trade for Trae Young. I think that's going to be what the Lakers do to get out of this version of themselves. Also, they just have to hope that next year they don't run into the bleeping Nuggets, because they played really well in this stupid series. It didn't go their way. It made me mad.
At some point, you got to beat them. And guess who's not going away? The Nuggets.
Coming up in 15 minutes, we're going to dive into the junk drawer. But next, is there value in hiring a coach who has been through this kind of a retool already? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals got a doubleheader today in Detroit. His first game will be at 2:40. Game 2 will follow 40 minutes after the conclusion of Game 1. For Game 1, Kyle Gibson versus Jack Flaherty. And then for Game 2, Steven Matz will get the start for St. Louis. This Sports Update is driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
I got to say this on the front end. Alex hates Todd McClellan.
I don't hate Todd McClellan.
Wow.
It's just welcome to Retread Central, where we're bringing in another head coach that was unable to get past the third round in the playoffs, only got to the third round once, and then also didn't have success in San Jose, although they were in the playoffs very consistently, didn't have success with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in Edmonton, and didn't have success with Ajay Kopitar and Drew Doughty in L.A.
Yeah, doesn't hate him, though.
Very,
very clearly does not hate Todd McClellan at all, as you just heard there. So
Great guy, I would assume.
That's the background of what we're about to have as our conversation. Is there value in hiring a head coach who's been through this kind of retool before? Because, Alex, you don't see this very often, man. It's rare for a team to, on the fly, go from a previous iteration of itself where they were a Stanley Cup contender, not bottom out, and then try to maintain competitive play while retooling into your next contending window. That's what the Blues are trying to accomplish. It's hard. It's not easy to do. You have some young players that will allow that to hopefully take place here in St. Louis, but it's going to be a challenge. And when you're in this window, you're going to have some veterans that want to win now. You're going to have some young players that are going through growing pains. See Zach Bolduc falling on his head last year and having a goal go the other direction. That's part of a retool. It's what it's going to look like sometimes next season. Todd McClellan's been through that. He saw it through to the other side in L.A. Now, they made a horrible trade in the offseason that we all panned the moment that it was made when they decided to bring in Pierre-Luc Dubois. And the results was him getting fired this season 48 games into the year with the L.A. Kings. But prior to that, through 2 seasons in the retool, the L.A. Kings were terrible with Todd McClellan at the helm. But over the last couple of years, 99 and 104 points is what they ended up with on those 2 seasons. They looked like they were on the path, and that's why they made a big deal this offseason, to getting back to contention, like real contention, not just we're going to potentially make the playoffs. No, we could contend for something real this season. Alex, is there value in that? Having that kind of a guy on the bench that's already seen something like this through to the other side?
I don't think so. And again, you set the precedent of me hating Todd McClellan, so anything I say is going to go right out the back end. But I look at this as you're trying to exit out of this retool. And the L.A. Kings looked at Todd McClellan on the back end of their retool and said, you're not the right guy for us. We've got to go elsewhere. I don't see what the benefits of putting that guy in place for you if you're hoping to get out of it. And I understand a lot of people look at it as this is the ground floor of the retool. I also look at it thinking, but you've got Robert Thomas and Colton Parayko and Jordan Binnington. You've got a lot of assets that can make you at the very least, a playoff contender next season. And then I look at Todd McClellan and I say, success where you've been in the past, but you were on the back end of the retool with Ajay Kopitar and Drew Doughty, where you had like legit Hall of Famers on your team, and it wasn't good enough for you to stay in place to see this through. So if you're giving me this scenario, I would much rather go with Drew Bannister, because Drew Bannister at least is on the ground floor with this and is growing in this position. I know what the ceiling looks like with Todd McClellan. That's why
He made it to the conference finals a couple of times, so that seems like a good ceiling.
I mean, a couple of times when he was with the San Jose Sharks back in 2011, 2013. Like, that's not
I cannot stress this enough. Don't worry about it.
I don't know if you remember the NHL in 2013, but it was a very heavy physical brand of hockey back then.
2010 and 11.
If you're going to give me well,
literally 15 years.
Yeah, 15 years. That's good. If you're going to give me these scenarios, I would go with the guy who see if he can grow into this position with the roster. But this is why my sights are set higher in terms of a Jim Montgomery, in terms of a Rod Brindamore. I like the idea of Sheldon Keefe. I know I'm on isolation island with that. Or the David Carl. Like, I would go those routes rather than get somebody who I know what that ceiling looks like.
So if Sheldon Keefe says no,
why would he,
Let's
not going anywhere else.
Let's assume he says no, or the Blues aren't interested, which is possible. They might be on other people's side of, he's not a good coach. We don't want him here. Carl says no. I want to stay at Denver. I want to see this thing through here. I've got a good thing going for me. Who was the other one that you mentioned?
Brindamore, Montgomery. Those two don't do it.
Montgomery's a no. Okay, now we're down to like Bannister, assistants around the league, and McClellan.
Bannister. I would go back to Bannister. I'd say
of all people for you to say that's interesting to me.
Well, again, you set the precedent of me hating Todd McClellan, which I don't. Like, I understand.
I think we've now arrived at a place of you definitely don't like Todd McClellan.
Like, if you bring in Todd McClellan, you are committing to this for 3 to 5 years. You're committing to him bringing you out of the retool. If you go with Bannister, you're saying we want to see what this looks like for a full season. And if it doesn't look good, guess what? Well, now there's another crop of coaches that you could go back to and say.
I'm not sure you are committing to McClellan as long as
as much as we've seen. I mean, hell, half the league's
You're not just bringing him in for 1 year. You're committing to him for 3 years.
Agreed. I think it is a 3-year commitment. But I think whoever you bring in is probably a 3-year
Jim Montgomery gets out of his contract next year if he's not leaving Boston.
Sure. I mean, then you could do what Vegas did, right? Vegas had an opportunity to go get Cassidy, and they're like, okay, we like our coach, but Cassidy's available. Of course we have to hire him.
I look at McClellan and I say, what are you hoping he accomplishes?
Getting out of retool.
I think Bannister could do the exact same thing.
I don't know if he can, though.
I mean, Todd McClellan, his first 2 years, was picking 1st overall and 5th overall.
Agreed. And then what do you do? For 2 straight seasons, went to the playoffs with the same team.
Third place.
I'd take that right now.
Yeah, and 100 points.
I think you could get there with Bannister. He had 100 points once.
99 another year.
Not 100 points. Look, man, I'm giving you exact numbers. 100 points once.
I think there's, to answer my own question, is there value in hiring a coach that's seen it through to the other side, what the Blues are trying to accomplish right now? I think the answer is yes for me. Like, I don't value retread coaches. You know, Alex, I've been the one that has stood on the podium right there with you saying, do not go hire a retread. However, this is a guy that's been through what you're trying to accomplish. He has seen the young guys go out there, make mistakes, and got to the other side where they were a playoff team and had an opportunity over the last couple of seasons to do something that would have been really exciting for them in LA. And how many times has Doug Armstrong pointed specifically to the Kings and said, I want to do what they did. That's the retool that I want to do here in St. Louis. Well, the guy that accomplished that retool is Todd McClellan. And so I have no idea if it would work here in St. Louis. No clue. But I'm pretty sure that he could get you back to respectability. And if you decide at that point, 3 years from now, I don't think he can get us any further, then make the hard choice then. But for right now, I do think there's value in having this kind of a coach on your bench.
Let me ask you this then. If Lindy Ruff didn't sign with Buffalo, would you have signed him?
No.
Because he just did the exact same thing with the New Jersey Devils. Saw him out of a retool for 2 straight years. I mean, sure, but regardless, I think they got out of it.
Their getting out of it was with future all-stars all littered throughout the roster.
I mean, they got out of it with McClellan by drafting Quentin Byfield and drafting the kid that was 5th overall that's playing defense for him right now.
Sure. The Blues have a couple of those guys already in place. Robert Thomas here. Jake Neighbors here. Colton Parayko here. Jordan Bennington here. You're going to have, anywhere you go, you're going to have a few good players. I think there's more value in a guy that has gotten out of specifically a retool like you're trying to do, as opposed to a rebuild like Jersey, where they were terrible for like 3 to 5 years. Yeah, personally.
No, I mean, look, I completely understand that, and I mean, it might benefit you. If you're going through a retool, I'm looking for somebody who can take that ceiling to the next level, and I think a lot of people have seen what that ceiling looks like with Sheldon Keefe on 3 separate teams.
By the way, is McClellan the guy that plays the, what is it, the
1-3-1?
Yeah. I'd be interested. It's a different style than, like, so here's, let's get super nerdy with this, and I don't know if you know the answer to this question, Alex, and so maybe we should reach out to somebody that's covered the Kings and like would be more familiar with this. Is there a specific kind of player that you need in order to run that system? And do the Blues have the players to run that system?
Well, I mean, I don't. Yeah, Jamie Rivers would be able to answer that better than me. But like, let's just take the team that he just did it with: Drew Doughty and Anze Kopitar? Do you have a Drew Doughty and an Anze Kopitar on your team?
Man, I guess your hope would be
Thomas is Anze, which I could see.
Parayko.
You don't have a Parayko's not Drew Doughty. I mean, Doughty plays like 30 minutes a night. Yeah. Parayko plays a lot, but it's not that. And
there were nights under Bannister where it was pretty close.
Very true. I mean, he had nobody else to go to right now. But no, I mean, like, look at your defensive core right now. Do you think you could play a 1-3-1 with the guys that you have? I don't see it that way. Like the offensive side, like that's the forechecking style. But again, it's a tough brand of hockey, and you just saw. I don't think Berube ran a 1-3-1, but you saw a tough brand of hockey and what this team did when they didn't want to play that way. That's why I think you need to look for something different than what it was, which I don't know if Bannister was different. I don't know if McClellan's different. I see a ton of people texting in right now saying you want Sheldon Keefe. He's a crybaby. Look, I don't understand the crybaby side of it for Sheldon Keefe. Every coach complains when things don't go well in playoffs. Except for Craig freaking Berube. But guess what? You fired him.
And also, that's why it was so like, whoa.
Yes.
When in the moment when Berube didn't complain, everybody.
John Cooper was just whining about their playoff series. Like, everybody complains about
Jim
the
Montgomery
playoffs.
was complaining about the off days during their series being in, what was it, in Toronto. They were like, why can't we get these in Boston? I don't understand. We're always in Toronto for our off days. Aren't we supposed to be the home team? So, yeah.
And somebody
he's not alone
saying, like, Lindy Ruff is not in the same conversation as Todd McClellan. Why? Lindy Ruff got to the conference finals 3 times when he was with Buffalo. He got to the second round with Dallas. He got to the second round with the Devils. Like, this is why I just don't want to do the retread. And I understand some of these guys would be retread, like Sheldon Keefe or Rod Brindamore. But
it's only one.
But it's 1 year compared to 3 or 4 years with these guys. Frankly, if you put it in front of me, I would like David Carl more than anything. Because David Carl hasn't gotten a taste of this, and you could build from there. Maybe Todd McClellan is awesome, and if he gets hired, I just look at it and think, I've seen what this team looks like in a system with a coach. I think you need to try something different than what has worked with other teams.
And that's where maybe we differ a little bit. I've seen what it looked like with Drew Bannister. Wasn't bad, but the 5-on-5 left a lot to be desired. And they did not get away very much from the rush stuff. Like, it was still very much rush-oriented with him and at the helm. With McClellan, he has a very specific style that his teams play. And that would make me wonder, like, can that work here? I don't know. The answer may be a resounding no, and it might go backwards as opposed to forwards. I'd like to find out. He's Alex's T-Bone on BK. Junk Drawer next. Have you guys ever thought about going to Dave & Buster's and betting on arcade games? What it would be like for you and
when I
T-Bone
was
to go
15.
up there. Well, you got to be 18 or older. Go up there, play a game of Pop-A-Shot, and then see who wins. Whoever wins gets the $5 that you bet between each other. Well, now you have that opportunity. Dave & Buster's is officially allowing customers to bet on arcade games. And I could not be more excited.
I don't know if I've ever been to a Dave & Buster's.
Really? What?
Yeah, I don't think I've ever been.
They didn't have him in Olney? I would
No,
imagine.
no,
They had a
surprisingly
soda shop.
not.
The soda shop.
Yeah, the old soda shop. But no, I don't think I've ever been to a Dave & Buster's.
You can bet on skee ball, hot shots,
Sweet.
Arcade games. I would imagine pinball if you really wanted to.
I don't think
I'm
they
pretty
have
good at pinball.
At Dave & Buster's?
they?
Yeah, man. They got a little bit of everything for you over there at Dave & Buster's. If they would like to sponsor our show, we'd be happy to do so.
What are you doing?
Oh, wait, I'm thinking of foosball.
He's doing these motions over here. I'm like, dude, what are you doing? That's definitely
It has to be something that is a skills-based game.
Foosball is...
So it can't be something that's already automated within their system. But if it's a skills-based game, you're good to go. You can bet on it over at Dave & Buster's. There's going to be so many fights.
Oh,
So
yeah,
many
this is
fights
not
that
gonna-
take place because of this.
Oh my god, I can't wait for the first fist fight that takes place. Yeah.
This is not going to go
Yeah,
well.
I don't bet on arcade games.
I'm in, though. I would totally do it.
Yeah.
I mean, why not? I'm there to have a good time.
Yeah, I get too angry.
So wait, so does it work to where, like, when you're facing, so like, let's say you and I are playing skee ball, we can just put down like $5. Can you already do
My
that?
guess, I don't know how this would work. Like, we
gonna
could do
be-
it on the side. Now
Yeah.
it will go through the system, is my assumption.
Okay.
Is like,
I say it's gonna be
it will
really-
be automated to where we would both put in, $20 each, and whoever wins gets
Maybe
the
you have
$40.
to like fill out a form so they know who to get plus odds on. Like BK, yeah, sucks at skee ball, plus 300 to beat T-Bone, the athlete of the group.
If and when this happens,
No.
here in St. Louis,
No.
I'm in. I'll go with you.
we will absolutely go. And Dave & Buster's, if you have an advertising person that is listening to the show right now, we would like to be the first ones
Yes.
that go out there and participate in this. That way
We're
we can
in.
show everybody here in St. Louis just how great this is.
Yes.
I love it.
Include T-Bone, please.
I'm out on that one.
Greg Wyshynski, notorious Jordan Binnington hater, will join us next to discuss why he believes he was robbed of a Vezina Trophy finalist next year on 101 ESPN. Alongside Alex and T-Bone, I'm VK. We're happy to go out to the 101 ESPN hotline because yesterday we saw a tweet from Greg Wyshynski of ESPN.com. And he posted, Alex, that Jordan Binnington was robbed of an opportunity to be a finalist for the Vezina Trophy.
Darn tootin'.
And you know, when Greg Wyshynski posts something positive about Jordan Binnington, we are going to give that man a call, and he joins us now via the 101 ESPN hotline. Wyshynski, we appreciate the time as always, man. How you doing today?
Yeah, usually when the intro begins with Greg Wyshynski sent a tweet, my wife goes into hiding for a few days.
But the rare positive Wyshynski tweet.
Yeah, it's never good. No, man, listen, like you said, it's no secret I'm not waving the pom-poms with Jordan Binnington at all times, but facts are facts that this guy, in my opinion, was, if not the third best goalie of the league in the league this year, definitely better than Sergei Bobrovsky, who ended up being what's likely the third candidate for the Vezina behind Connor Hellebuck and Thatcher Demko, who I think we all agree were probably the best two goalies in the league this year. So, I said my piece. I think I'm right. And there were a lot of people that pushed back on it. And I got a good understanding of why he probably wasn't a Vezina finalist, in the sense that there's so much built-up angst and, negativity towards Binnington because of his antics or who he is or whatever, that I just feel like he's really kind of ice skating uphill to try to get respect for a season that, frankly, was extraordinary by a lot of standards.
Can he get away from that at all, Craig, moving forward, or is that always going to be on his resume?
I mean, being on your good behavior will always help. I mean,
that's what my grade school teacher told me.
Well, look no different. Look no further than Brad Marchand with the Boston Bruins. I mean, this guy at one point in his career was seen as the leading cheap shot artist in the league. Now he's still a rat and still flaps his yap, but he's not like the guy who's going for your knees at all times anymore. And that used to be his reputation. And so it's because he stopped kind of dabbling in that. And then there was more appreciation of his offensive game and all this other stuff. So, the more distance there is with Jordan and the I'm trying to fight everybody stuff, the more his reputation probably gets mended. But the easiest path for Binnington is to be the Team Canada goalie, either in the Four Nations tournament or in the Olympics, which is, I think, something that's definitely in the conversation, considering how unbelievably short the bench is in Canada for goaltenders right now compared to the U.S. And I am pounding my chest and thinking of what my gold medal acceptance speech will be when the U.S. wins the gold. But I mean, that's the other pathway too to respectability. Because again, to go back to Marchand real quick, the real turning point in his career was when he was in the World Cup for Canada, and they put him on a line with Patrice Bergeron and Sidney Crosby, and he did great. And all of a sudden, the perception changed of, oh, okay, we saw him as this, they see him as this, and now maybe we need to change our own perception of him.
That's interesting. Greg Wyshynski is our guest here on 101 ESPN. Greg, I did want to ask you a little bit about non-Blues related stuff that's taking place in the NHL right now. These playoffs have been pretty awesome so far, and there's a lot of storylines that are coming out of them, including what the hell is going on in Toronto right now, where it feels like we're watching the end of an era for them. What do you see as the immediate future of the Toronto Maple Leafs, Greg? How different could they look this time next year?
Well, if this is the end in Game 5 against Boston, and based on the way that Jeremy Swayman has played against them, you assume it will be the end. It wouldn't surprise me if this is the end for Brendan Shanahan at the top of the organization. He has overseen all of the changes in the last few years, and they haven't manifested in anything beyond one playoff round win last season. And then you look at the core, and I think the interesting thing about the discussion about the Leafs is that, to me, a lot of the people that have talked about them have finally gotten to the point where they should be, which is these are all outstanding players. They're star players. Austin Matthews is, going to be maybe the best goal scorer of his generation. He's not the problem, and neither is Nylander. But you look at Tavares, you look at Morgan Rielly, you look at Mitch Marner, and you say to yourself, these are three problems. Tavares in his age and the money he makes, and Marner and Rielly simply not being the players that they're cast to be. And by that I mean, Morgan Riley is a great defenseman, but he should be the Ryan McDonough to somebody's Victor Hedman. He should be the Shea Theodore to somebody's Alex Pietrangelo. And he's being asked to be something that he can't be in Toronto. You may see what I'm saying? So, and it's the same thing with Marner, too. Like, you can hope and pray that somebody who's 26 or 27 years old will all of a sudden become a good playoff performer, but it's just not going to happen, right? So I think there has to be a change to the core of this team. I think they'll be aggressive about it. I think this is the end of the line for this group.
Greg, you could have said anybody other than Shea Theodore and Alex Pietrangelo, man.
Come on, man.
Come on. Come on. We started positive with Bennington.
Number one defenseman that you could have selected.
I'm living in 2024, okay? You guys can go and be like the Colton Parayko to the Alex Pietrangelo. You can do whatever you want. But I am living in 2024.
No, that's the problem, Greg. We want Pietrangelo back here in St. Louis, so Parayko can be a number 2 defenseman.
The man wanted a no movement clause, and we all know. Yeah, I know.
So real quick with that, though, because I have been seeing a ton of that. And Marner, I mean, look, there's no coincidence that everybody's barking at each other on the bench with Mitch Marner. Wherever his next destination is, Greg, does he still become a problem, or do you think that problem leaves when you're not in Toronto?
First of all, the barking on the bench is good. Like, that's, if he was staring stoically into the distance and not saying anything, that's bad. But showing a little bit of passion, like I said this on our podcast that dropped this week. If you AI generated imaged Nathan McKinnon doing the same thing Marner did in that spot, people would be building a statue for the guy. Like, it's good to care. I think there's a certain theory in the NHL that I like to call the Tyler Seguin, Jack Eichel theory. And the theory is you're never going to become the player you're supposed to be in the place that you are. So you go someplace else and become better. And I think that theory could apply to Marner, which, again, is not an argument to keep him, because the crux of the argument is he'll never manifest into what he's supposed to be if he's still in Toronto. And so you could see him go to Anaheim. You know, you could see him go someplace else, Detroit, wherever, Utah, wherever, right? And you can see him maybe getting out of the pressure of Toronto, exhaling a little bit, and in the playoffs maybe then you find your game. But like Eichel in Buffalo, like Seguin in Boston, like, you just need to get these guys out of those situations to see if they can become the players they're supposed to be.
Follow up to that, Greg, would you put Jordan Kyrou into that same conversation?
No, I mean, listen, I know that he's a roller coaster of a player, but I mean, I think he's done fine. I mean, I don't think that necessarily when you think about why the Blues don't succeed, you look at Jordan Kyrou necessarily.
Oh boy,
and I
you
think
should see our text line, Greg.
It is a beaut.
But that's the insular thing, and I think he's earned it in some cases because of his lack of production, and it's hard to shake the idea that you killed a coach and all this other stuff that goes around with him, especially this season. But, you know, when you think of someone like Eichel, for example, like, that was supposed to be the guy who saved the franchise, and then it all went sideways, and he never really became the player he was supposed to be there. And so that's the level of consideration that we're talking about here. It's not necessarily trade Jordan Kyrou and the team, you know, turns the ship around. I don't think that's necessarily the case. And I have an outsider's opinion of the guy. I don't think he's as much of an issue as some of these other guys are.
It's so funny because every outside opinion that we have heard, and I'm like unanimously, says basically what you just said about Jordan Kyrou. I'm curious, Greg, we were talking about this a little bit earlier today, just because in terms of like the stylistic play, there's some similarities between Marner and Buchnevich. Obviously there's differences, but do you think Mitch Marner is $4 million better as a player than Pavel Buchnevich?
$4 million better. His point production is pretty remarkable. And the other thing too about him that I love is I love him as a defensive forward. I love him on the PK, for example. Like, I think Marner is a really special two-way player. I would rather have Buchnevich at this point in the playoffs. But then again, that's based on Marner's production and his play while in Toronto. So is he $4 million better? I mean, that gets into the semantic economic, what does this guy make and how did he get there kind of question because of the salary structure of the respective teams. But I do think that he's a better player, if that's what you're asking. Sure. And I'm intrigued to see what goes back the other way. Somebody said a couple weeks ago, before even he started throwing his gloves on the bench, that what if you did Marner for Clayton Keller from Utah? And that's an interesting one. One, because Keller is locked up much longer term than Marner is. Marner's UFA after next season and looking for a huge, contract extension. So I'm intrigued to see what the possibilities are. I do think that there are probably deals out there that are those like one-for-one blockbuster type situations that could get Martin out of Toronto and make the Leafs still a really good contending team. I don't think they're going to have to sell him for nothing if they're.
Greg, moving over to the Blues side of things, and I know it's the offseason, a lot can change throughout these playoffs, but a conversation, of course, is around the coach and who that next head coach could be. In an ideal world, who would be the next coach for the Blues, in your opinion?
Well, ideal world is doing a lot of heavy lifting here.
Don't say Craig Berube or Scotty Bowman.
No, it'd be great. It'd be Joel Quenneville, but like that's probably a non-starter, or maybe it's not. I don't know. Like he's doing apology tours, apparently, and trying to mend his reputation. It completely would. It all depends, and this is the same conversation we had last year with Quenneville when it looked like the Rangers were interested. It all depends on one, the NHL signing off on his return, and two, whether the market could stomach all of the blowback that would come with hiring the guy. But listen, unless John Cooper somehow shakes loose in Tampa, the best available coach is Joel Quenneville. It's just that you have to understand that he might not be available, and if he is available, then you're going to have to make a real moral judgment call as to whether you want him on your payroll.
Beyond him, Greg, Todd McClellan is a name that has been brought up. Depending on what happens here, I have a feeling Shelton Keefe is going to become available.
Why would you say that?
Would you have a lean on those guys, or would you rather, like, if you're in the Blue situation, do you go one of those directions, or do you just stick with Drew Bannister potentially?
I think Bannister did a pretty good job. I don't like Keefe necessarily. I think he was a nepotism hire in that market when Kyle Dubas was the GM. And I don't like the way that he handles teams in the playoffs. I think I've always liked Todd McClellan. I think the problem with Todd McClellan is that he gets you to a certain point and has been unable to get teams over that hump. And I think that's been his MO in the Edmonton and Los Angeles, and before that, San Jose. So I think that's really the issue with him. The one guy that's interesting, though, and I mentioned Edmonton, is Jay Woodcroft. Jay Woodcroft had done a really good job in Edmonton with that team, trying to get them to play better defense and giving them a little bit of structure. I know Connor McDavid was a real big fan and felt kind of guilty that his play was one of the reasons Woodcroft got fired at the beginning of the season. I'm intrigued to see what his second act looks like in the league. I think he's a really intelligent guy with a good analytic mind, and I'm intrigued where he ends up next.
Final thing, we'll get you out of here on this because you're not getting out of here without talking about a Tkachuk. Any legs to the Brady Tkachuk stuff, in your opinion?
Who knows? I mean,
okay.
Ottawa's such a mess right now that like it's hard to really get a gauge on what the commitment is. I mean, you have to take Brady for his word that when he signed that extension up there, it was to be with that team. It was to be in that city. It was to be there for the good times and the bad over the next several seasons, in the same way that McDavid committed to his team at the time when he signed that contract. So I can only take it on that. And then, I guess we'll see how things shake out in the offseason and where they're headed. They have a new owner. They have a new GM. Is it going to be rebuild time? If that's the case, maybe he's thinking something different. But as of now, it's just kind of conjecture, I think, at this point.
Hey, Greg, always appreciate your time, man. Thanks so much for hopping on with us today. Appreciate the love for our guy Jordan Bennington as well.
Keep it up, Greg.
I've been with you every step of the way. Last year, I felt like maybe he was getting a little too much credit here locally. This year, I think nationally, maybe not enough credit. I'm right there with you, Greg. So appreciate you hopping on with us today, man.
Appreciate it.
You're the best, buddy. Thanks.
Greg Wyshynski. Appreciate his time, as always, joining us here on BK and Ferrari.
Man, there's a lot of stuff there. So first thing I thought of with him.
Jay Woodcroft?
Dude.
Everybody likes him, apparently.
I shot it down because Cat Dad Gamer up on our YouTube stream was telling me that this was a great idea. Shout out to Mike Ryder, too, watching us on YouTube and tweeting us. But no, here's the thing. I completely overlooked this guy. He was an assistant. I know. So he was an assistant with the Oilers, obviously, but he was an assistant with the Sharks during their run.
Yeah, with
Todd McClellan. I'd argue McClellan had success because of Jay Woodcroft, but
wow,
he had success in the minors. Don't wow me. You just heard Greg say, you know what the damn ceiling is
That's
for
like
McClellan.
saying Schild had success because Marmol, and that just isn't true.
Schild had success because of Pujols and Molina. Anyway, shut up, guys. The success he had, Woodcroft, in the minors. Listen to this roster real quick. Hold on.
All I can think about now is Shilton's portrait of himself.
Weird, man. I don't know how you got to that. That's disgusting.
Did you
First
ever
of all,
see his Airbnb or his house?
yeah, didn't he have a big portrait?
It was like life-size portrait.
Dude, you know
in his
that's like
office.
American Psycho up in his bedroom. You know that, right? Anyway,
Okay,
guys,
we've gotta
hold
move
on a
on.
minute. Let me finish this damn thought.
Go to break.
Woodcroft won a championship in the AHL. Just go to damn break. I can't even
We'll
get
talk
through
about
this.
Woodcroft next. Maybe some more success.
Success. If you want to have success with the exterior of your home, your business, then you need to call Rhino Shield. Darren is always sending me updates of different businesses that he and his team are working on. Already completed jobs in 2024, Chesterfield Amphitheater, Kempen Automotive in House Springs, Cottleville Smiles, and he also sent me the pictures of Metal Supermarkets in O'Fallon where they redid the exterior on the siding and they redid the roofs, and it looks brand new. That's what you get with Rhino Shield, a brand new look to your home, your business, whatever it might be. We've all seen them with the paint chipping off. We got water stains on the siding, rust. You need a new look, and that's why you call Rhino Shield. They have a coating process that cures 8 to 10 times thicker than anything you're going to use. It's 100% waterproof. It deflects 90% of UV rays, and it's backed by a 25-year transferable warranty. So when you're looking to update the exterior, call Rhino Shield. Give Darren a call today, 877-25-RHINO, or check him out online, 877-25rhino.com.
Alex and T-Bone on BK. So Jay Woodcroft, huh? That's your new guy?
I don't
You
even
hate
know.
Todd McClellan, you just want to hire his assistant?
Well, I'd argue that the head coach had success because of the assistant. Look at me using that word again right now. I don't think it's the best hire. I think it's an interesting one. He was a Missouri River Otter back in 2000. Does that mean anything to anybody?
25 years ago, why not?
Why not? I mean,
I'm talking about success that another coach had 15 years ago, so I might as well talk about the place in which somebody lived for a year when they were 20.
I mean,
why not?
He had more success in Edmonton in 2 years than Todd McClellan had his entire time in Edmonton. And both had Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl.
I mean,
he made it to the third round and the second round.
Sure.
I mean, 2 years later.
Different points in their careers.
Sure, exactly. But I wouldn't be opposed to it. I don't think that's a retread either, because he got 2.5 years essentially of an opportunity with one team. That screams more Craig Berube, to where it was you had success where you were in the AHL. You had it when you were on the bench as an assistant, but when you got the head coaching job, for Berube, it didn't pan out the way he would have liked it to, and that's what got him fired. For Woodcroft, you had success, but you weren't able to take it to the next level, and that's what got him fired.
I guess my question would be this. If you ended up getting fired with Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl, like, what's going to happen when you have Jordan Kyrou and Robert Thomas?
I'm with you.
If you can't get those guys and that team to play the style that is necessary in order to win, it's really hard for me to believe that this is going to be the team that does it. That being said, they got to the conference finals in his first year as the head coach. So there is success that you could pull from there, but it did not end well.
I could argue the same thing with Todd McClellan, too, especially whether it was Edmonton or in the LA Kings when you had a already established Anze Kopitar and Drew Doughty. And that's why I would much rather...
Dude, finding the right coach is
or
so
Sheldon Keefe.
stupid in the NHL.
Well, yeah, Sheldon, exactly. But sometimes I feel like it's beneficial to get a guy who gets a second chance, opposed to somebody who's done it 4 separate times and it still hasn't worked. I mean, we saw it in St. Louis with the second chance of Craig Berube. Now, believe it or not that Berube was an incredible head coach, or maybe he got lucky with that roster. However you want to view it, a second chance worked there. I always look at it as if you give a guy a second chance, I wonder what that looks like compared to giving a guy a 4th, 5th, 6th chance. You know what it's going to look like.
So you mentioned earlier, talking about like 3 years down the road, you're committing to this guy for the next 3 years, right? Can I give you the list of current NHL head coaches that have been with their teams for at least 3 full seasons? The entire list of them, okay? John Cooper, he's been in Tampa since 2013. Mike Sullivan, he's been in Pittsburgh since 2015. There are some rumors that maybe they could be going different directions, but it sounds like that has kind of been put to rest at this point, probably going to be staying put. Maybe there's some other changes to the staff. Jared Bednar, he's been in Colorado since 2016. Rod Brind'Amour, we'll see what happens this offseason, but it's possible he goes his separate ways with Carolina. He's been there since 2018. And then Sheldon Keefe, who we all expect to be going his different direction than Toronto, he's been there since 2019. So it is entirely possible that after this postseason, the only 3 coaches that have been with their team since the start of the 2021 season are Cooper, Sullivan, Bednar. That's it. That's 3 years, dude. So, like, whoever you hire, the reason I bring that up, whoever you hire right now, the odds are pretty strong based on what we're seeing around the NHL right now that they will not be here in 2027 when you're really probably starting to contend again. So that I do wonder what kind of an influence that has in their decision-making this offseason as well, is like, hey, man, if we don't think this coach is going to be here 3 years from now anyways, do we just give the guy that we just saw do pretty well with our roster an opportunity and see if he fails, see if he succeeds, and sink or swim time?
And that's where and
see if Jim Montgomery maybe becomes available next offseason.
And that's why if you're not shooting for the guy that you view as being here in the same conversation as Brind'Amour, Bednar, Cooper, and those guys to me would be a Montgomery, would be a Quenneville, would be a Brind'Amour. Or Carl.
And Quenneville, you're putting into a separate category entirely because
there's a lot more. Exactly. But, I mean, Wyshynski just said that. Yeah. Unless you're hiring one of those guys that you look at, hey, when we exit out of this retool, they're still going to be here, bring back Bannister until you find that coach. I think that's what they're going to
decide.
Yeah, I don't know who that other person is that they're waiting to talk to. Look, like Montgomery has to get out of his contract. That's the biggest thing. Boston's got to be on board with it. I don't think Brind'Amour would be interested here. Quenneville might take too long because they're not going to discuss that before after the playoffs.
It's worth it while you're in a retool.
And it sounds like Carl's not here.
I wouldn't hire him no matter what, but for them, like given the calculus of where you're at in your life cycle, I don't think it's worth hiring Quinville for them.
I do think you might come back to Drew Bannister here.
And I would also point out, because you brought up John Cooper, Rod Brindamore, of, none of these retreads, quote unquote retreads that we've talked about, none of them in the second opportunity went beyond the 5 years. It was always like 3, 4, 5 years, boom, they're gone, what we're talking about. And I generally think that it happens for every coach. But who got their first opportunity and stayed a long time? John Cooper, first opportunity with the Lightning, still with the Lightning. Rod Brindamore, first opportunity with the Hurricanes, still with the Hurricanes.
Good point.
Like, that's where you can first say, like, okay, we give Bannister, for example, or the coach from Denver an example. Bring him in, see if it works. If it doesn't, you're just back to where most of the NHL is, where you fire the coach. If it does work, he grows with the core that you have, like Cooper did, like Brindamore did, and all of a sudden, instead of going continuous through this coaching cycle that you just continue to churn through those guys, maybe you do find the next John Cooper that can stick around for 10 to 15 years.
Even Sullivan only had two years with Boston prior to his opportunity in Pittsburgh as well, and it was 10 years before.
And it typically does not happen to where you see a retread, a quote-unquote retread, stick with a team for a really long time. And I think it's almost something you have to just admit that at some point, you know what? Everybody's just going to quit listening to him, and we're going to have to fire him anyway.
If you're going to make a...
By the way, did you mention Bednar as another guy that first
I did not.
opportunity?
I just looked up those two.
He started on the ground floor. That's the thing. If you're going to hire somebody, you're bringing somebody in that's starting on the ground floor with this that you expect to see through. And if you don't believe that person's out there or you can't get him, then I don't see a point in hiring a Todd McLellan or hiring any of these other guys, because you know what it's going to look like. I just run it back with Bannister. Same can be said about Jay Woodcroft. Like, although it's intriguing, do you really see Jay Woodcroft being a part of the solution?
I don't know.
I mean, Woodcroft's the one that I'd put a question mark with, because I put Woodcroft kind of in the conversation of a David Carl. Like, I don't know. I don't know what it would look like 3 years from now, whereas I feel like I know exactly what it's going to look like with McLellan 3 years from now.
I think you probably do. The thing with McLellan, and what for me would probably push me in that direction, honestly, like he'd probably be my leading candidate as I've thought about it a little bit more. I think he's going to leave it better than he found it. Because I think if you have him in place, he's going to foster an environment based on everything that we've seen from him in his history, where Wyshynski just mentioned it. He's going to get you to a certain spot, and then it's not going to go any further. Well, I don't want to get to that spot right now. And then I can find my next coach that I believe can take me the next step. But right now I need to get to that first place. I need to get back to the playoffs. And I do think Todd McLellan has the ability to get you there. And then it becomes a question of, can you find the guy, capital T, capital G? And maybe that's when you hire somebody like the Denver coach, or you try to go reach for the next version of Brindamore, or maybe Montgomery at that point becomes available for you. Like that's why I'm kind of leaning more towards the McLellan path, is because I do have trust that he can see this through in a way where my young players are going to continue progressing, and I am going to be in contention by the time that he's done here 2, 3, maybe 4 years down the road. And I think there's value in that. But if you are reaching for the stars, it goes back to our open from the conversation today. If you're reaching for ceiling as opposed to floor, you probably go Woodcroft. You probably go continue waiting for Monty, for Brindamore, something like that. If you're trying to increase the floor, I think that's the McLellan hire. McLellan helps you reach a new floor.
Yeah, I just, like I said, I get the Todd McLellan thing. If I'm going to make a different decision, because a full season, you might be looking at it as Bannister could have got you to the playoffs, and you nearly got there. If I'm going a new coach,
sorry.
No, you're fine.
I didn't mean to cut you off there. With Bannister, my concern would be, what if the goaltending takes a little bit of a step back next year? How much of Bannister's success was based on Binnington being amazing?
And I just think that's a roster thing.
Great.
I think any coach you bring in, you might be relying on that same thing.
Maybe, but with McLellan running a specific style that can help you overcome some deficiencies with your roster, that could be something that helps you there.
And that's the other part of the McLellan thing. And again, Jamie's going to be able to explain this much better than I would, because I don't understand hockey to that level. I mean, the entire team talked about how excited they were about the defense going to a zone and how it played to their specialties. I don't think 1-3-1 plays into this roster specialty, and unless you're making significant changes, do you really want to change what worked for at least Parayko and Leddy this past year? Because that's the area that you'd look to at least emphasized from last season.
Fair question. Something I'd be curious about Jamie talking about on the fast lane. Maybe he will discuss that
I think
later
he's just
on
going to
today.
rip into me for not liking McClellan.
2 to 6 o'clock right here on 101 ESPN. Coming up next, how long should the Cardinals stick with Steven Matz if this does not get turned around? We'll talk about it next year on 101 ESPN.
Alex Ferrario with you to talk about my friends over at Classic Air Care, taking care of our HVAC system. Now that we're going to start getting into the warmer days, that humidity kicking up, I need to make sure my unit is in great shape. And that's why I use Classic Air Care. They've kept my 26-year-old unit alive for the last 3 years, and I'm going to go through it once again because they take such good care of me. But here's the part why I love Classic Air Care and why hundreds, thousands of people are using Classic Air Care. And if you don't believe me, check out all of their reviews up on Google Documents with the 4.8 rating, but you see all of individuals talking about the customer service, talking about how they've called with issues and technicians have come out, like this one from Kristen. We had our technician, Kyle, come out and tell us exactly what was wrong. He fixed it that same day and had our HVAC system up working as he left. Very helpful, very knowledgeable, honest, and professional. Use the company that is going to take care of you and your family, and that's Classic Air Care. They've been making people comfortable since 1926. Classic Air Care and ClassicAirCare.com.
Terry Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals back in action today as they've got a doubleheader with the Detroit Tigers. Game 1 starts at 2:40. Kyle Gibson on the mound for St. Louis. Jack Flaherty will get the start for Detroit. Then after the conclusion of Game 1, 40 minutes after that, Game 2 will take place. Steven Matz will get the start for St. Louis. The Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. See them at londoff.com. Chevy, together we drive. Are you kidding me?
Alex is as mad as I've ever seen him.
It's because it's like 110 degrees in this room. I just hit myself in the nose.
Am I pitting like crazy right now?
I wore a white shirt, so I'm lucky I didn't.
It's not good. It's
Quit crying,
very
you two.
hot.
I just hit myself in the nose. That really hurt. Oh, man. I got a black eye.
It's really dark.
Oh, man, that hurt, man.
All right, so we wanted to talk about Steven Matz because it's not going super well right now, man. The first couple of starts looked pretty good, and we're like, oh, Steven Matz is back, and then he wasn't back. And the last couple of starts have been really bad. Over his last 2 starts, Alex, he's gone a total of 9 innings, and he's given up 12 earned runs. Unfortunately, the walks are back, 6 walks over the past 2 starts, and he's giving up a lot of hard contact. Right now, on the season, if you look at the ERA, it's 5.5. If you look at his fielding independent, it's a little better than that, so he's gotten a little bit unlucky so far. But he's not getting deep into games. He's giving up too many runs. Alex, if this continues, if it doesn't start getting better, what do you think the runway looks like for Steven Matz in the rotation? Because we're having the same conversation right now that we had at this point last year.
I would say you probably have a couple more starts until they figure out who the guy that could step into that role is available, and then he goes to the bullpen. I don't think you have a lot more starts with Steven Matz to give because, as I told you guys yesterday, like my concern about this rotation are the next 3 guys we're about to see. It's Steven Matz, it's Miles Mikolas, and Kyle Gibson. Gibson's been good enough to where I look at it and say, I'll take you as a 5 every day of the week. Mikolas has not been the number 2. Matz is the one that everybody thought was supposed to be like a 3, and Lance Lynn has outperformed him. And arguably, Kyle Gibson has outperformed Steven Matz. You can't keep doing that. So I think he specifically becomes a bullpen arm for you, and you just use him in the platoon role, which he's going up against lefties. That's who he's getting out.
Exclusively.
That's what you become, essentially what Andre Palante was last year.
Yeah, I think when you look at Matz, I think they're going to give him about the same amount of runway they did last year. And last year he got 10 starts, had through 50 innings, and had a 5.72 ERA. So, I expect that that's probably going to be about where they go. And that would be about at the end of next month. By the end of May, I think you're going to have an idea, and I think that's when the Cardinals will have to make that decision. And it still gives time for look, I know Sam Roberts, he's pitching well down in AAA. He's barely thrown in AAA. If you look at his overall numbers both this year and last year when he got a taste of it, by the end of May, you build up a couple more innings. I think you would probably be close to 150, I think, at that point, once you're in AAA over 2 years. Then you can make the decision. And for, the argument of, well, who do they turn to? They don't have anybody better. Well, they didn't have anybody better last year, and they took him out of the rotation. So if he does not turn it around by the end of May, you start the cycle game. You start the cycle game of, okay, can this guy be R5? Can this guy be R5? Can this guy be R5? And you just keep going through it until you find somebody that sticks.
The problem is once again, changeup. He doesn't have a second pitch to go to that he really believes in right now. And he almost exclusively throws the changeup to right-handed batters. And when he does, it's getting crushed this year, guys. 378 batting average against, 650 slugging percentage against. He's thrown it 100 times so far this year. It's ended 37 different at-bats, and it's 14 hits. Of those, 4 doubles, 2 home runs. If this doesn't get changed, he's a one-pitch pitcher, really. He doesn't have a great breaking ball that he goes to all the time. It is the sinker and it is the changeup. That's what he's going to the vast majority of the time. He has other stuff. He'll throw a slider, he'll throw a curveball, but you don't see it very often. And in the bullpen, you can make that work. You can work with that. As you go through an order multiple times, if you don't have a lot of command, a lot of conviction is the word that they used a lot last year with that changeup, it's just not going to work for you. You cannot continue going down the same path as you did last year if that doesn't get turned around. Now, eventually, last season the changeup started working for him. And when it did, he looked like a different starter. We saw it down the stretch of last season. Changeup looked good again. He had conviction. He was throwing some serious velocity as well. It looked like he was attacking hitters. And then, boom, we saw the last, I think it was 6 starts of the season, looked great for the Cardinals. He's got that potential in there still. That's why they continue to try to run him out there. It's because they signed him to be a guy that can give you 5 innings of quality baseball, and he can do that at his best. But this season, we're through 5 starts. I think he gets 5 more. I think he gets 5 more starts before you make a decision on, is this going to work this time, or is it going to be a repeat of last year where we're going to have to yank him from the rotation? You put him into the John King role, but usage is more often. And if you get a run of lefties, like if you're going up against the Phillies, for example, you get that run of lefties, 2 out of the 3 batters that he faces are big-time lefties, boom, that's your spot, Steven. Otherwise, you just that's probably the only time that you really get to use him.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think in 5 starts, you can have a really good idea of what it looks like. And you're right, it's the changeup. Like in the first 2 starts this year, when we were like, oh, Matz is back, guess what? It looked good. It was the changeup. Yep. So I think you're right. I think you get 5 more starts. And if not, you put him in the bullpen. And for people saying, well, what about his contract? The contract plays. Man, a good reliever can make $14 million, $11 million. I think that's what he's making, $11 million. Like, yeah, that's what a really good reliever makes. So, like, make him into the bullpen arm. It's not the end of the world. And if that means he's a bullpen arm next year as well, okay. But I think he's going to continuously be the swing man to where you try him as a starter. At times it does work and it can be effective. But then there are the times that it struggles. You just put him back into that bullpen until he figures it out. And then if you need him back as a starter, boom, you swing him back into the starter role.
So they did make a decision, by the way, today. Since it's the true doubleheader, they had the option of taking up a 27th man. Drew Rom has been placed on the 60-day IL. We knew that was going to happen eventually. He's seeing a specialist. It's a bicep issue, apparently, is what they're calling it right now. They decided to select Kyle Leahy as their 27th man. And I think you can learn a lot about where they're at, by the way, with their depth based on this decision. The Cardinals don't really have other options right now. And I think that's part of what's playing into their decision-making process with Steven Matz of giving him more runway. You could go to Simra Bursay, but like you said, he's barely thrown at AAA. I guess you could go with, I don't know, Michael McGreevy, but is it going to look a whole lot different? No, it's just going to be less strikeouts. I don't think that they have another real option right now at the AAA level that could give you more quality innings than what Steven Matz is currently giving you. And the maybe bigger concern, you don't even seem to have a whole lot of depth at AAA for your bullpen right now. It's going to be until about June before we start seeing some of those young guys showing signs of being ready for the big leagues at any meaningful way. So I think the reason why you do this is Kyle Leahy, if he comes up today, 40-man roster move, if you had to put him back through waivers to send him back down, you could.
And that's why
you're doing this.
That's why I think Zach Thompson's going back to the minors, because they're hoping he can be a better version of Steven Matz when Steven Matz combusts.
And same thing for Palante. Yeah. Palante's going back down to the minors, so that way you have another guy that can extend if you need him to. You've got to build up that 6th and 7th starter. They told you all offseason, we have better depth. No, you don't. No, you don't. You will hope that you have better depth by the time you get to June or July. But right now, it is the same depth as it was a year ago, which meant Drew Rom was your 6th starter. And now that we know he's out for a while, potentially for the year possibly, you have no depth right now to your rotation. So they cannot withstand an injury right now. They need these guys to stay healthy.
And to your point on the bullpen arm, I think you're right. It says a lot that Leahy is the guy that they call up. I think what they've got to be looking out for is maybe somebody that flies under the radar. Bullpens are always things that kind of mold together throughout the season. And I'm not saying the bullpen that they have right now at the big leagues is bad. I love their bullpen. But to the point of depth, they got to be keeping eyes on guys that get DFA'd. See if they can spot somebody that in the rough, like when they got Luis Garcia.
I was about to say the same thing.
He was brought in. Now, he got put into the majors right away. But can you find one of those guys that you then end up bringing onto your 40-man, sending down to Memphis, and can bolster that depth? Because you're right, the depth in the bullpen is just as bad as the depth in the rotation.
They did the same thing with TJ McFarland.
Yeah.
The year that they got him. Now, that's not like a super exciting piece, but they got him for nothing, and it ended up working out pretty well for him. Those are the kinds of moves that Packy Naughton was a pretty small level move, if I remember correctly. Those are kind of the moves that can pay off in a pretty significant way. Mo's been pretty good at that. He's missed on some other things, but he's been pretty good at those smaller moves that can move the needle a little bit. With Alex and T-Bone on BK, we'll hit the rewind and give you an opportunity to win a 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash game coming up next here on 101 ESPN. Coming up here in just a couple of minutes, we'll give you an opportunity to win a 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash game for the Cardinals versus the Mets. Harrison Bader back in town. That's the real headliner there. Next Bud Bash game of the 2024 season includes a limited edition Tony Womack bobblehead. Text in coming up in just a little bit. Keep this number close, 314-399-9646. You'll have a chance to win a 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash for the Cardinals versus the Mets. Alex, a traditional doubleheader today. For those of you that are just tuning in, we did not do the lineup game today, so I would assume the Fast Lane will do so coming up during their show. 2:40 first pitch for the Cardinals versus the Tigers. Jack Flaherty will be on the mound for Detroit. And then in the second game, they have officially announced that Matt Manning will be the scheduled starter for that one.
The lost Manning brother.
He's been pretty good for them so far this year. Very limited opportunities, but in 2 starts for them, 12 innings, allowed 4 earned runs. It looks like all of which came via a couple of homers. Alex, what are you expecting today from the Cardinals in these 2 games against the Detroit Tigers?
I'm expecting them to struggle. Offensively, I mean, I know Jack Flaherty hasn't been like ace Jack Flaherty, but his swing and miss stuff is elite. And if one thing's for sure, this Cardinals team is swinging and missing. I like the fact that he's going more offense in this matchup, just to see what this offense can do, to see if you can get it going. And obviously, I know the doubleheader will change a little bit, but that's one thing I'm expecting. And then it's another opportunity for Kyle Gibson to impress more than what the expectations were. And if you can avoid that blow-up inning again, you're just going to keep walking away from these games saying, man, the pitching is finding ways to get it done.
T-Bone?
Yeah, I think they'll be fine today just because their bullpen. They've got a deep enough bullpen to survive a doubleheader. The number one thing you think about with a doubleheader is the struggles with a bullpen. The fact that the Cardinals have an A and a B team kind of in that bullpen makes you feel a little bit better, and I think that gives them a bit of an advantage. I am curious to see what Jack looks like, though, against this lineup, because we're getting to that point. We talked about it yesterday. Ollie going a little bit more offensive-minded in Game 1. For the Cardinals, I don't think they're there yet. I think they need to still stick with this defensive mind, how they build out their lineup, and I think this today is more just of the doubleheader. I think you're getting to that point where it is, hey, we've got like a 2-week run, and we got to figure out if this offense is actually going to turn it on. And that's where it gets interesting to watch them today, because they're going to get a bunch of at-bats today, going to go up against Jack, they're going to go up against whoever the hell you said was pitching in Game 2. Like, they should be able to take advantage of. This is not a great pitching staff for Detroit. So can this offense start to show some signs of life here in this doubleheader and start to build momentum here as we get to May?
It's not a great pitching staff. It's also a terrible offense. This is an offense that your pitching should do pretty well against. They have 3 guys that crush left-handed pitchers. So those guys will be the ones that I would imagine they'll stack up at the top of the order against Steven Matz. We've seen right-handed hitters crush him so far this year. You should win both of these games. You should. Now, the bullpen's going to be a little bit of an interesting discussion depending on who's available and when in these 2 games. T-Bone mentioned earlier today, it's really smart to have Gibson starting this first game to limit the innings that your bullpen has to cover. But they should win both of these games today, and then we'll see what happens for them tomorrow with Miles Michaelis on the mound. All right, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Texter number 101, you're going home with a 4-pack of tickets to next Tuesday night's Budweiser Bash if you answer this question correctly. There is a new place that is now accepting wagers that you and a partner in a game of skill can place a wager on. Who is that restaurant? If you can name that correctly, your texter number 101, you are getting the 4-pack of tickets to the Cardinals Budweiser Bash game. For Alex and T-Bone, I'm BK. We'll talk to you guys tomorrow at 11 a.m. Fastlane's coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
Bill had sex.
Yeah, I would challenge that a little bit.